Pacers are at as they take a check of where everybody is within the Eastern Conference as well as the Western Conference in this rebuild the Pacers are ongoing as it enters a third year with the hopes that this third year of the rebuild will push them back into the playoff conversation. But a cross-conference trade likely in the works and the return of what was thought potentially dead, the Big Three era, it appears, with Phoenix getting set to acquire Bradley Beal from the Washington Wizards in a package trade that would include Chris Paul, Landry Shamet, several second-round picks, and a pick swap. None of that has been finalized just yet. Adrian Wojnarowski on ESPN expects it could take a couple days because Chris Paul, as you alluded to before we went on the air, did an interview today and was like, I just found out about it, just a couple hours ago when I was on the plane in for this interview, promoting his book, I believe it is, and I don't know what's going on. But he's not playing in Washington, and maybe a third team would enter the ranks to get him to a contender. A lot to unpack from all of this, but is the Big Three era, despite everything they've done in the CBA, back with this trade?
I don't know. I think it's TBD, to be determined depending on if they win. I mean, we've seen iterations of it. The last one being the last huge one being the experiment with Kyrie, KD, and James Harden. That didn't really work out. And so you wonder, when is the last time we've seen a true Big Three? I know we saw with Golden State. I don't know if I really count them because they were more kind of like a lot of their talent was homegrown and they just added KD and upgraded from, Harrison Barnes to KD, which was insane. So maybe it was, the Cavaliers with Kevin Love, Kyrie, and LeBron. Miami, probably a little better Big Three because of, them being able to win too. But I was kind of shocked that I'm not obviously as plugged in on the NBA side as I used to be, but just the math and the money, I was like, wow, they have 4 max guys now in theory. Now, you have to wonder if DeAndre Ayton gets moved, but, you got Bradley Beal's making a ton of money, KD, Book, and again, DeAndre Ayton, and they're all making a boatload of money, and so it's back. They're going to roll the dice on it with the Big Three era starting up in Phoenix, but you just wonder how it's all going to fit. And, a guy like Chris Paul, when he's healthy, is easy to fit because he's such a pass-first guy, he's a true point guard. You add Bradley Beal, who's a scorer, next to Book, who's a scorer, next to KD, who's a scorer, and then DeAndre Ayton was already kind of upset about the touches he didn't get. Is he going to touch the ball now? So, I don't know. I'm very curious to see how it all shakes out, but I think it's one of those things we're going to look back at this and say, if KD can't get it done now, and I hate to be that guy.
No, it's already starting. It was a headline on First Take. How much help does KD really need?
Yeah, I'm not going to go that far.
I know you're not that far, but that's where the extremes are of that viewpoint.
But Jimmy, it's a real conversation that has to be had because if we look back at his career and when it's all said and done and consider all the great players he has, teamed up with, and he wasn't able to get it done outside of Steph Curry in Golden State. I'm not the one where it's like I put you down because of that, but you do have to look at other players and kind of gauge their careers relative to who they play with as well. So a lot to unpack there, but for Chris Paul, you just wonder if, that 2 games where they were up on the Bucks, is that as close as he'll ever get to a ring? And is that the last time we'll see him in the NBA Finals? Because he isn't getting any younger or any healthier. So we'll see. Chris Paul, buyout, Lakers. I don't know.
That's been the biggest rumor to this point for a deal that, again, has yet to be finalized. And you would argue that would probably be one of the best cases where he could still have playing time and have a shot to go in and contend for a championship, at least just looking at it off paper.
Yeah,
and
I just say that because the Lakers are always like the name that comes up. It's like Lakers? Yes. Lakers?
It's I figured you knew this, James, and maybe it's one of those don't talk about Fight Club rules, but I figured as a one-time member of the NBA beat, it's one of those where they have to be linked in any rumor mill article that you write.
Inside joke, I guess. Or not even inside, it's like an outside joke. Everyone knows the joke, and it's hilarious. Goodness gracious, let Tyrese Halliburton go into a contract year or something like that, and you're going to hear all of the Lakers, and so it just never ends. But I do think, in all seriousness, this does change the power dynamic in the West a little bit because in my opinion, Phoenix did get better on paper. Now, they were always going to struggle with depth anyways, but the no-trade clause that Bradley Beal had, one of 10 players ever in the league, really made this trade what it was and made the return so weak, in my opinion, because he had the power to veto anything, and so you kind of have to say yes to whatever is being offered to you. And I wonder if teams looking at what Bradley Beal was able to do with that no-trade clause just stay away from it altogether no matter how great the player is. And I was looking at the list, Jimmy, the list of players who had a no-trade clause, we have David Robinson, John Stockton, Kobe Bryant, Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, Dirk Nowitzki, Dwayne Wade, LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony, and Bradley Beal. One of these 10 is not like the other. Like, I'm serious. All of these other guys are Hall of Famers. I know there's controversy over Carmelo Anthony and his career. He's a Hall of Famer, top 75 guy. Matter of fact, all these players were top 75, except for Bradley Beal, who was a 3-time All-Star, 1-time All-NBA third team. And I think that just speaks to the incompetency of the Wizards. Why in the world would you give him a no-trade clause on a team that was awful? Like,
I mean, that's where you tip the cap to the agent, right? And
yes.
the group that's representing Bradley Beal, because you're right, he's not the name that belongs on that list whatsoever in terms of just comparison of all those players that have previously had no trade clauses. But, I mean, give credit to Mark Bartlestein of Priority Sports, Beal's agent, and their partnership group over there to be able to get that fixed in there, because it's a nice blanket to have that not every player is fortunate enough to be able to control where it is they want to go. My biggest, and this has continued to be for the Washington Wizards the last couple of seasons, and obviously they've had a change in their general manager department, but my biggest thing with the Wizards is I don't really see the benefit of the move outside of it's clear that Beal's time there is done, and he does hold a lot of the cards with the no trade clause, but I mean, you're getting back Chris Paul, who's, I'd be shocked if he plays a minute of basketball for the Washington Wizards. Like, I would be genuinely stunned if that's where he is come opening night. Landry Shamet, who's a fine role player, like he's
doesn't move the needle.
I mean, like but it doesn't do anything in terms of your necessary development as a franchise. Several second-round picks, which, I mean, you could find value in the second round, but in theory, unless you're very, very lucky, and you would do things the Wizards haven't always been able to do, which is hit picks out of the park left and right in that range of the draft. And then a pick swap, which I guess if that's a first-round selection, I mean, yay, you're back in the first round in some cause or way, because it would be a back-end first-rounder if things work out for Phoenix.
I was going to say, like, that's not even a good pick swap, so it's a tough situation. Again, that no-trade clause really
wrecks things.
It messed him up, and to me, in hindsight, you gave him all this money, Bradley Beal, that is, because you wanted him to stay with a terrible team, and so
that's one of those things where it can get lost in negotiations sometimes. If, let's just say, because we don't know, but if that was a deal breaker during the contract negotiations, like, no, I want a no trade clause. Well, if you're a market like the Wizards, even though they're in DC, they are still viewed as not going to, I mean, they've spent the money, but you need to do everything you can to recoup your assets, so they're not ending up in Los Angeles as a free agent, or ending up in Miami as a free agent. And if that's all it is, the negotiating table, if you lose sight of the power of a no-trade clause, it can bite you in the back like it did here.
Yeah, and I mean, again, hindsight is 2020, but had you traded Bradley Beal back then, before you gave him the no-trade clause and the supermax and all these things, obviously his value would have been higher because he was younger and healthier. I mean, let's not forget that Bradley Beal's been in and out of the lineup the last few years with various injuries, and so that's a question mark there as well. So there's a lot of things to dissect with that, but I do think that the NBA is a more star-driven league than any other professional league that we really look at. And basketball, you know, as an entity, as a sport, is obviously easier when you just kind of load up on superstars and hope that they work well. It's not the NFL where you might have 3 or 4 star players and it just doesn't matter because it's such a team-oriented sport. With this, I mean, they're going to be able to score against anybody. Obviously, can you stop anybody? You know, and that's the other question. Bradley Beal's never been a great defender in his career. Is that something he's going to take on more of a bigger role in, considering that that's what it's going to take to win? And so one little thing I want to throw out there is Bradley Beal's agent is actually the son of the Phoenix Suns CEO. So there's a little,
Small world.
Yeah, so I figured that would be a pretty easy deal to get done over dinner with your dad if you just go in there and say, hey, I got this really great player who wants to get paid, and you have a team that needs another player, and kind of offload another player that's aging. So how about we all get this going, Pops? And so, that was an interesting little nugget that I found out yesterday.
With the money that is being made by DeAndre Ayton, does he become a liability in all this? Or does he become a player with a real opportunity to have a bounce back season and be worth the money that he was paid? Because we had these conversations last year of Pacers fans. Did you want DeAndre Ayton here? And there was a time where, because big free agents don't come here, there was a serious conversation of give it a look, right? Maybe you're able to make something happen. And obviously the Suns went ahead and matched that offer sheet, and he stays in Phoenix. But a year later, I'm glad they didn't make the move for a number of different reasons. I still don't know fully how DeAndre Ayton would fit here with where the roster is constructed right now. Second, that's a lot of money to have allocated to a real true center. This isn't a player that we're looking at the same way we would, even though he can shoot a little bit. It's not the same way we look at a Miles Turner, a Nikola Jokic, a Joel Embiid, Karl Anthony Towns. It's not the way that we look at DeAndre Ayton. I'm glad the Pacers didn't do it, but now looking at the Suns, they made that decision to match. They didn't want to let him go. And now you have all this cap space tied to not just Beal and Durant and Booker, but Ayton as well. I feel like that potentially complicates things for what this team's going to be able to do.
So they have a lot to weigh, in my opinion. I think the first thing you have to think about is Frank Vogel's work with big men.
Fair.
He's had a lot of success in his career. Obviously, we know here in Indianapolis what he was able to do with the Indiana Pacers and Roy Hibbert. Got him a max deal.
Yep.
And then obviously with that Lakers team, Anthony Davis had a career year. Dwight Howard, JaVale McGee. He really used traditional big men, and that was probably the last team that we've seen just be big and win big. A lot of teams try to go small ball, or their big is so talented like a Jokic where you can play him all over the floor. They were playing true centers. Mm-hmm. Like Dwight Howard did not shoot outside of the paint. JaVale McGee did not shoot outside of the paint, but you couldn't score on him, which made it so hard. And so that's what you have to weigh, but also trade bait. Like, do you offload DeAndre Ayton, who has been disgruntled throughout his time there because it doesn't touch the ball enough, and do you sacrifice him in his max contract, put him in a situation that maybe he's happier in, and then recoup some, depth and some players that you honestly needed during this last run? Mm-hmm. So you just wonder, a lot of things have to break the right way for the Suns when it comes to health. KD's not getting any younger.
No.
He's looked a little mortal last postseason. Maybe Bradley Beal could take some pressure off and he looks back to KD. But, there's a lot of things you have to weigh, and I just think that me personally, I would be just checking to see what DeAndre Ayton's trade value is. And, if I'm better off trying to, get 2 or 3 really good role players as opposed to trying to pigeonhole him into a team that, again, has 3 scorers and 3 guys in their career who can go and get you 55.
Couple things here. Adrian Wojnarowski joined Chris Canty on Greeny just before us, and he was talking about how the Phoenix Suns are going to be shocked, or are shocked kind of at the lack of traction they've been able to get on DeAndre Ayton because they don't feel like they're getting the return that they feel like they could get.
I'm shocked.
Secondly, here, Draymond Green just opted out of his on his final year of his offer with Golden State, and Woj tweets that his agent Rich Paul says that it's expected that he would opt out, and now he can talk to the Warriors, explore sign and trade and free agency, with the sign and trade caveat thrown in there. What about Golden State as a sign and trade option with involving DeAndre Ayton going to Golden State, and you've got Draymond Green going to Phoenix?
I'll let you go first, because I have an initial thought.
Golden State's title window will be over, in my opinion. I think that what Draymond does in that system is far more valued in that system than anywhere else in the league, and I just don't think that swapping him out with DeAndre Ayton really makes them a better team. I don't see how that's going to happen. We can talk about Draymond's antics and him having the triple singles like Charles Barkley likes to joke, but the guy is basically their de facto point guard. he makes a lot of things happen as far as the chemistry he has with Clay and Steph. And he plays, even to this day, like he's declined a little bit, he plays outstanding defense. And so I don't know how I feel about that. I think if I were Phoenix, I'd probably feel better about that and what he could bring to the team over there. But for Golden State, I'm hanging up the phone.
It's not even as much, and it is a big factor. It's not even as much for me what the Warriors look like without Draymond. It's what they look like with DeAndre Ayton there instead. Because even though they are an aging team in some regards, they rely on floor spacers and the ability to play up and down, fast-paced style of basketball. Not to say that Ayton might not be able to do that for a little while, but the idea of him being a starting five, key contributor, heavy minutes at the pace that they like to play at, I think that is as demoralizing, as destructive to what the Warriors have been able to build as losing Draymond. And you add those two in the same trade that you're getting hit not only with Green's departure, but also the addition of Ayton. Yeah, I don't necessarily see it as a good move for what the Warriors are still looking to do within this window that they're trying to maximize.
So, Eddie, you asked us the question. Now you should weigh in. I want to hear your thoughts because I think it's an interesting conversation to have, but I just don't know if you say goodbye to that Golden State championship like core before you see them just get too old and they just can't do it anymore.
Well, obviously the ball's in Draymond Green's court, for a lack of a better phrase. So, he can do whatever he wants. So, that just because he's like, hey, I want to do a sign and trade with Phoenix, let me help you out. That doesn't mean, that Golden State doesn't have to do it, but they can if you want to get something in return for Draymond. And you look at the Phoenix roster, there's no real point guard on the roster right now other than Campaign. So, you could theoretically, put Draymond Green in that point guard role if you wanted. And then you can put him out there with Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, and whomever they would start.
Yeah, that's something to think about.
But ultimately, I don't think it would be a good move for either party.
Yeah, I don't know. But at the same time, if you'd have told me a couple of days ago, 12 hours ago, 24 hours ago, when this trade went down or got at least set in precedent that this would happen, I would tell you you're crazy. So the NBA does have a nice way of always keeping you on your toes, because every time you think this contract is untradeable or this situation is, untenable, like, it happens every time. And so we have quite a ways away to the 2023-24 season, but there's going to be some eyes on Phoenix for sure because of just the firepower they have. And as you said, Jimmy, when we started this segment, can they get it done as a true big three? Because to me, they're going to have to carry the load enormously, and you're going to just have just enough. And then we talk about teams that are able to sustain their greatness or their success. It's hard to do it with the big three because of the wear and tear, because of the age, because of, just the chemistry and things like that. And usually if you are able to win it, it's just like by a hair, because your role players are just good enough and maybe just not as old enough to still contribute, because they're going to have some old guys filling out that roster, a lot of, 1 year vet minimum type of signings, and then like rookie and second year guys trying to, grow up fast to help them win a championship. And so as much as I trust Kevin Durant, Booker, even Bradley Beal to a certain extent with playoff experience, you wonder, the other thing that we can't really equate is how much pressure can you put on guys to step up who haven't been in that position. And then you know how it is, like the lights get bright in the playoffs. The criticism gets a lot louder. I'm one of those people who will criticize you. So, it's fascinating to see that actually happened. And then just the way Phoenix has been since getting the new ownership, they've been so aggressive with their moves. And you wonder if Chris Paul will get the last laugh somewhere else. That's my next thing, is where does he go to have a chance to contend for a championship? Because I know he knows he's only got, he's 37, 38 now. A smaller guard playing all these years in the league. He's only got 2, 3, 4 years maybe left. And so you just wonder, what can he do to go somewhere where maybe his load isn't as heavy and he can just coast through the regular season and then get to the playoffs and see if he can just punch it in, one more time and just have enough virtuosos to get them over the top.
Where, if at all, does this ripple effect come here towards Indiana? Because you've already seen different columns on other, I won't say powers, but other teams in the East that were maybe in or thought they were in the Bradley Beal sweepstakes that have now pivoted other places. I look at the Miami Heat rumor mill, and it's continuing to churn about, well, they were potentially interested in Beal. They'd love to have Damian Lillard, but it's this actually the time that Dame decides to say, Portland, hey, I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to get out of here. Is there a secondary trade partner in any of these deals? Likely wouldn't be for the Phoenix move, because you would assume that would be a team that wants to bring Chris Paul in, and it would also potentially be a contender for him. They could, again, just do the deal straight up. Wizards could buy out Chris Paul, and that's all there is to it. But then we have the looming cloud of the Pacers and all the second-round picks they have, and the prevailing thought that they're going to make a trade. They're not going to draft all of these rookies, but it's likely a trade that happens either day of or maybe day before the draft. Does this change anything for you in terms of what could be acquirable or what the Pacers could want to do?
Well, I mean, Kevin Pritchard was in Portland when they drafted Damian Lillard and LaMarcus Aldridge, so maybe he just, revisits some old roots and tells them, hey, I'll give you all these seconds for Damian Lillard. How about it? But no, I don't think it has too much an effect on the Pacers and what they want to do. But I do think the Damian Lillard potential trade to Miami could change things, because you're bringing more star power to the East for a young Pacers team that is trying to make that climb, that jump. And as we, may have forgotten, Miami wasn't a top-tier team throughout the regular season in the East. They were that team that if the Pacers were healthy, they probably would have been contending for a 9-10 spot in the play-in, or 7 or 8 eventually in the playoffs. So I think that's more something to keep an eye on, just because of the star power that Damian Lillard possesses and how he would swing the pendulum in the East. And for the Pacers, I think right now you don't really worry too much about what other teams are doing as far as their trades and free agency and stuff like that. You just worry about Thursday night, getting a young player in here who's going to match what you want to do in the future, and hopefully build from there, and then kind of see. Because to me, the Pacers are always going to be sort of that second or third wave of offseason moves, where you're not going to be the one that sets the market or sets things off. You're not going to be the first domino to fall, but you have to kind of see where the other teams go and what the chips do when it comes to those teams, and then take your chips and figure it out from there. But I think they're in a good spot. They should be excited about the future, and I think Thursday starts another chapter of that.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll reevaluate another rumor surrounding the Pacers this time as we get closer and closer to the NBA draft, and how it might change our overall feelings headed into round 1 of 2 that'll take place on Thursday night. That's around the corner. You're on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
7-5, The Fan.
Fan Midday Show, Jimmy Cook, James Boyd, Eddie Garrison with us as well. That was the voice of ESPN's Brian Windhorst. A report from him last week. Chris B. Haynes of Yahoo Sports echoed similar sentiment in a couple tweets last week as well. The Indiana Pacers may be, in fact, not only shopping the treasure trove of second-round picks they have, as we've been discussing the last couple of weeks, but perhaps they might get out of number 7 in such a way that allows them to get a ready start today wing.
What does it mean, Jimmy?
What does it all mean, Eddie? First off, reaction off the top.
Now, why would they do that?
That was peak journalism right there.
Oh man, it was what a moment. Put it in a museum. It was great for sure. Now I can't say what does it mean for you with the 7th pick, and you look at what's available right now. I see some pieces like the Thompson twins, like Jarris Walker. Again, these are hypotheticals. Who's actually going to be there? Like Cam Whitmore, where maybe a rookie isn't the worst thing in the world to be able to still develop around this young core that most of them, or at least most of the pieces that you look at and say, yeah, I would like this to be a part of the next stage of the Pacers, haven't been in the league that long. Outside of Tyrese Halliburton, outside of Miles Turner, a couple other pieces here and there. I know we've discussed Buddy Hield, what his future holds, but this is mainly on just that specific wing position. Do you see more value in the draft? Or if the name was enticing enough, I don't think it's just 7 and straight up. You'd have to sweeten it a ton, but say it was OG Anunoby. I mean, I mentioned that last week, and that's been someone the Pacers tried to target at the deadline last year. That might make me come off the stance of, hey, you got to hold on to 7.
IU guy. Oh, my goodness. But no, jokes aside, I do think that if there was a pathway to getting a player like him on the team, you have to do it, because I think he's young enough and he's proven enough to feel pretty comfortable in saying that he's probably a better player already and will be than whoever you get at number 7. And I think we did the study on this when I still work for Indy Star covering the Pacers. The likelihood of you getting, an All-NBA, All-Star caliber player drops off significantly when you're outside of the top 5 anyway. Like, you'll be able to get a starter player, a high-end role player, but if you can get one that's a proven commodity already, why not do that, considering where your team is and what you're trying to do, which I believe the Pacers are trying to do is get back in the playoffs and get into the play-in and have a season that is more of a step forward literally in the win-loss column. So I'm not opposed to it, but I think the Pacers are in a good spot because they don't have to be downright desperate. You know what I mean? Like, where, oh my gosh, we have to get a trade done. We have to get this done. If they were to keep their pick and choose Cam Whitmore, Jarris Walker, something like that, it's not the end of the world. You still get a player that I think fits your team needs. It's just more of a raw version of that. And then you have to weigh, okay, how quickly can we help this guy get up to speed? Because I know as much as they talk about the youth movement, Tyrese and Miles, they don't want to miss the playoffs anymore, especially Miles. Miles hasn't been in a few years. He's might be the only guy on the team. Yeah, I believe so. The only guy on the team who played for the Pacers in the playoffs.
That would be correct, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's a huge thing for him. So how much do you think he wants to keep waiting around to get back in that picture? So we'll see. I do think that Thursday, I know last year we were, at least I was thinking, okay, we might see some change here, some big trade. It was like one trade to get an extra pick in the second round, something like that. So I think that this year you really could see more movement with the Pacers because they feel pretty secure in their future, having hit on Benedict Mathurin and obviously hit on Tyrese Halliburton with the trade.
You mentioned a great point in regards to the 7th pick, and maybe there's not a need to trade it. I agree with you. There is still a need for a trade to happen, though, and that is, of course, with all the second-round picks that they have. Like, they need to be able to, whether it is moving up, whether it is getting a role player or bringing in a veteran. I'd be stunned if they walk away making all these selections in the second round, as would a lot of people, as at least what's being sold to us at face value from Kevin Pritchard is they don't have any intention of making all of these selections. I think it's still more likely that move takes place, likely, again, either day before or day of / during the draft versus moving out of 7, just because you need to get the perfect combination of player that's underneath team control for an extended number of years. Multiple seasons would be ideal, but also somebody that is young enough to still be able to grow and develop within what this team is. All IU jokes aside, Anunoby would do half of that in that from an age perspective, he'll be 26 entering this season, but he has a player option next year and then as an unrestricted free agent in 2025, and that player option is only $19 million. If he was to make the impact we think he would in this market, he's going to opt out and try to look for either a bigger deal with the Pacers or look for a bigger deal elsewhere, which is where you need to have either extension framework in place. Again, massive hypothetical. There's been no direct reports that the Pacers have retargeted OG Anunoby, but there was a little bit of smoke there at the deadline, and if they're looking for a wing player at 7, potentially could make sense his name would be back out there. Could be other names the Pacers are looking at. We went kind of in depth with that last week. But I think in general, in terms of Pacers and trade front, there has to be something that happens, whether they stay put at 7 or not, or whether they end up trading the seconds or it's a combination of the two. They won't be a flat line in terms of just no ups throughout this draft of activity other than, oh, here's their pick. Oh, when do they pick again? Okay, let's wait. Like, there will be activity in my mind of some kind.
Yeah, I think so too. And honestly, for my fellow beat writers out there, I would hope for that for you, because when I was doing Colts coverage and they traded to get more picks, I was thinking, my goodness, my day just got longer. So yeah, I expect that in all seriousness, because again, they're a team that isn't used to losing and tanking and all those types of things. So I expect them to try to right the ship this offseason and get back into playoff contention. And I do think that it's not a bad thing to do that, because to me, you want to show what you're building. And at this point, you've kind of gone through all the moral stuff to the point where you need to see some stuff on paper happen in real life.
We'll change lanes here for a second. Jimmy Cook, James Boyd, Eddie Garrison with us as well here in the DriveHubler.com studios. We are just a few days removed last week from the end of mandatory minicamp and the start of a brief moment of peace, tranquility, and just overall good vibes for one James Boyd. You can find his work, of course, at Romeoville Kid on Twitter, beat writer for the Indianapolis Colts via The Athletic. Before we get into your plans for restoration and getting yourself back up and ready for training camp, your takeaways from those consecutive days, finally being able to see consecutive stretches of this team, again, albeit just a mini camp, albeit not really the true dress rehearsals that take place during training camp in the preseason, but you mentioned it to us last week. You were looking forward to having more than just a half hour's worth of footage to show for people to get in your Twitter mentions and think that you're hating on the quarterback room.
I mean, the haters will always be there. I love you all. I really do. I enjoy the engagement. But I do want to say this. The offense did not look good the 2 days we were out there for minicamp. No matter which quarterback was in there, there were struggles from both of them. Now, you can take that however you want to, but that was my biggest takeaway is, okay, this is going to take some work. And then also, there wasn't a strong pass-catching group out there, you know, with starters that you would expect to be out there in week 1. Michael Pittman Jr. wasn't out there. Alec Pierce missed a day during OTAs. You know, Will Mallory, the rookie out of Miami, he wasn't available. Jelani Woods wasn't available. I mean, I can go on. Josh Downs wasn't available. It seems like anybody who you would expect to be in the starting lineup wasn't there. So it was harder to gauge just how much the offense struggled and then how to weigh that versus, you know, is it because they just don't have the guys out there that would normally be out there? Now, on the flip side, I think what stood out to me was Dallas Flowers. He had a pretty good pick against Sam Ehlinger. I know that's the third-string quarterback, but I understand also that on that particular play, Dallas Flowers made a great play on the ball. He's super confident. He's in a position now where he's going to get more opportunities. We've talked about these rookie cornerbacks as much as I feel like anybody would with Darius Rush and Julius Brinson. Those are exciting young talent. But Dallas Flowers is also kind of a guy where it's like, hey, don't forget about me. He's an uber athletic, you know, athlete as well. So I expect him to have a say-so in that cornerback room as far as who is starting. And then overall, I think the players themselves are really buying into Shane Steichen. I know I get it, who isn't going to buy in now, but they seem like they are. And it feels like there is, whenever you ask a player, the amount of detail they'll give you when it comes to Shane Steichen about how he wants certain things done, kind of lets you know what his thinking is, what his coaching style is, and things like that. So those are some of my main takeaways. But if you're asking me how the quarterbacks look, is Anthony Richardson on track to start? Like, I have no earthly idea because none of it really looked that good. And it was pretty much what you would expect from Anthony Richardson in particular. I would bet that he had the best throw on every day that we were out there. Like, he usually had at least one dime where you're just like, wow. But then he also you might have a pick or a high throw or something like that. And you're like, okay, this kid's raw still. And so I guess because I know Jimmy's going to ask me this. I don't care. It's about the quarterback getting out there young. We don't want to see Gardner. I understand where you're coming from. However, I'll add this in. Just it's not to appease you. It's just serious. I didn't feel like there was an ocean between Gardner Minshew and Anthony Richardson the last few days. Seriously, I was like, okay,
that's good.
I get it. One guy is been a pro, really good, pro for what he's been asked to do in the NFL. But Jimmy, it wasn't like I was thinking to myself, wow, they're just worlds apart. It was like, okay, two guys are struggling. One guy might have been a little bit cleaner with Gardner Minshew overall throughout all the practices we saw, throughout minicamp and OTAs, but it wasn't like it was some huge, difference.
There's one thing you mentioned in there that I want to dissect for a second. I just want to get clarification on it. So does that mean that we now have a 3-horse race for the starting quarterback position since you saw some Sam Ehlinger? Is that what you were saying? I just wanted to make sure.
No. But you know what? He actually did have some good throws, and he had the one that got picked up by Dallas Flowers that kind of maybe ruined his day a little bit, but he had some dots in there. And no, I do not think it's a 3-quarterback race.
So make sure. That would have been groundbreaking.
Oh, my goodness. It's just two. Two. But again, in all seriousness, it wasn't where I thought, Gardner Minshew or Anthony Richardson, either one of them, was just so much better than the other.
The other drama, if you want to call it that, or at least talking point from last week, was Jonathan Taylor. Him being outspoken and honest about where he felt things were. Nothing was too necessarily aggressive towards the Colts or critical of the Colts, just mentioning, hey, they've taken care of guys in the past. I feel like I'm on that track. I deserve to be taken care of. Michael Pittman Jr. is the other elephant in the room on the offensive side of the ball that we haven't talked about yet, that's entering a contract year. That's not even discussing yet Kenny Moore and the decision-making as well with Grover Stewart. Where were your interactions at all in the media scrum with JT, and were you surprised that he was as open and honest about where he felt like contract negotiations needed to be?
Yeah, so I actually had a one-on-one with Buck that entire time when JT was talking, so you all can check out the story I did on DeForest Buckner and his father George in The Athletic. It's a very heartfelt piece about their relationship.
Father's Day special.
Yeah, and what they went through and things like that, and Buck is as good a man as you will come across considering the things he's gone through, overcome. So there's my little spiel on that. But I was able to go back and watch the JT video, obviously see the quotes, wrote about it, and I was a bit shocked to see him be as forthcoming because JT is usually someone who just says the right things all the time to the point where sometimes you're like, man, you like a little more color, maybe a little more just how do you really feel? Because I know, especially after last season, he would give like great answers that obviously would go over well, I would imagine, with his teammates because he never really gave into how, or at least let us know how he really felt about last season. But then you hear about him talking about running backs, and you saw a little passion, a little fire where he's like, yeah, you see why guys ask for trades. You see why guys get disgruntled. You see why we feel this way because we hope that we're just valued for being good at what we do. And so I was a bit shocked that he kind of came out and said that the ball's in the Colts' court. And so to me, again, I'm curious to know, and maybe I have to do some more digging because it's my job to do that. It's like, is it the amount of years or is it the money or is it both? And is there able to be some middle ground? Because JT didn't sound like someone who was asking to reset the market, but also wasn't someone who's just going to take anything. And we could see this kind of get dragged out because, as we talked about previously, Jimmy and Eddie, like that franchise tag is out there and they can use it. And I think that they would be more likely to use it on him versus Pittman because I think that Pittman in his negotiations actually probably won't be that bad because of his position, his value at that position. Even if he isn't a top 5 guy at his position like JT is a running back, wide receivers are more valuable, especially when you just drafted a rookie quarterback. So I think it was fascinating to see JT talk like that. And then as soon as we're able to get Chris Ballard or Jim Irsay in front of us, and if there hasn't been a deal struck by then, because usually, Ballard and Irsay will talk during training camp at some point. If it isn't done by then, I'm curious to see what they have to say for themselves because, as JT alluded to, he's been awarded. I mean, not he's been awarded. Other players have been rewarded for being, good homegrown talent during the Chris Ballard era. And if JT isn't one of those players, wow.
It's the years for me. That's where I stand with it. I don't know what the Colts thought on it is, but it's the years. Because right now, he's 24 years old. Only been in the league 3 years, but Eddie outlined it very eloquently last week. We were discussing it. A lot of mileage on those tires compared to the way he was utilized in college versus the way other backs have been used. Wisconsin was not afraid to use him as a true workhorse back, and the mileage is there. I don't attribute that, by the way, to why he was banged up last year. I think that's just unfortunate luck. It's not to say that, he can't be a stable, healthy running back. But so often you see, if you go 5 years on this deal, by the time he's 28 or 29, I mean, heck, like people can say whatever they want about Dalvin Cook, and I understand he's a different running back than a lot of different backs you might point to as A-listers, but Dalvin Cook was such a fun watch throughout his time during Minnesota and such a dominant back at times that even though, again, he's dealt with some injuries too, and they've had Alexander Madison on the rise there in Minnesota, seeing him let go at 27 surprised me. It did.
It's scary, right? I mean, if you're JT, you have to feel like, man, what do you have to do to get what you think you deserve in this league if you have 4 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons, 4 Pro Bowls, and you just came off your best season. So
they pointed at a star running back in Minnesota and said, we're so mad at ourselves with the contract we did, we're going to take a cap hit to let you go. Like that's what just happened. And
yeah.
We highlighted again last week the Panthers and their need to get out from underneath Christian McCaffrey's contract for a lot of different reasons. They felt like that it wasn't matching where they were as a team, but also the money was a handcuff and the years were a handcuff. And with Jonathan Taylor, I don't care how much money you pay him. If it's a 3-year deal and it's by the time he's 27, and then either gets him an opportunity to potentially re-sign with the Colts at that point or find another deal elsewhere, great. But he gets his money. It's a shorter-term deal. It helps the Colts out. If he wants 4 or 5 years, that's just a tough pill for me to swallow without having to have in the back of my head an I told you so thing by the time we get 4 years down the line and he's not producing it the same way that he was. I don't know. It's a tale as old as time with player salary decisions. That's not new. But what is new the last 20 years is the way that we've seen a reevaluation at that specific position.
Absolutely. I mean, it's supply and demand, quite frankly. And it's petty to look at it like that because they are human beings. You want them to feel good about what they contribute to a team. But the last few years have shown, especially, that if you have a star quarterback, you can kind of make the running back position work by committee and kind of swap that in and out. And maybe you don't need a star like you did, back in the 90s or 80s where, you're handing the ball off to this guy and he's leading you to a championship. It just isn't that league anymore. It's a quarterback league. They decide, how teams go, how far teams go. And again, if you feel like you can get a glimpse of that with Anthony Richardson and JT together over a shorter period of time and then revisit it when that time comes, I'm with you, Jimmy, where I don't know if I want to give him a 4 or 5 year deal. So, and I think also the part that needs to be said out loud is how much guaranteed money is involved as well. Guaranteed money, I think, will just, and this isn't like insider information, this is just me from my own, I would believe it to be common sense. Guaranteed money is probably a very big sticking point in NFL contracts because you want to be able to say, when I sign this dotted line, whatever you do to me after that, I get my money.
No ifs, ands, or buts.
Exactly.
Cash. Yep.
Like, and we all know that, normally players who sign long-term deals at any position other than quarterback usually don't even end that contract on that team anyway because of how brutal the NFL is and how up and down it is. And so they can kind of kick you to the curb 2 or 3 years down the line if it didn't work out. But, again, your guaranteed money is still yours. Now, what are they willing to guarantee to him out of a possible, let's just say, $50 million for 4 years, $45 for 3 years? How much of that is guaranteed? And so that might be a sticking point as well. So we'll see how it plays out. And I do think that we'll get a glimpse of how the JT negotiations could work, depending on what happens with a guy like Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, and obviously what we see with Dalvin Cook, who's reportedly seeking, a pretty hefty payday. Where does he end up? And when he does sign, how much will it be for? And does that set those 3 guys and others kind of set the market for what you want to do with JT? And again, he has leverage because they have to develop Anthony Richardson, and obviously to develop him, it would really help to have a top 5 running back in your backfield. However, you don't have as much leverage as you would have had you had 2 great seasons. You've had the one, and as you all know, Eddie and Jimmy, it is a what have you done for me lately league. We saw that with Lamar Jackson especially. I mean, people kept bringing up the 2019 MVP, and it's like, who cares? It is 2023 now. So as much as you want to say JT had a great season 2 years ago, that was still 2 years ago. And for better or worse, they're always going to look at what you did most recently. And then there's questions of, okay, you got hurt last year. Is this the start of you being nicked up going forward? I'm not saying that about JT. Right. I would expect him to bounce back this season, like you said, with a fluky type of thing. But it's not totally out of the realm to say, did he peak in 2021, and will he ever get back to that again? I think he will, but that's a conversation you have to have as a GM, as a coach, to kind of roll the dice and really not even roll the dice, back up that Brinks truck and figure it out. So I'm very excited to see how it all plays out with JT. And again, a little surprised that he went down that route and kind of said his piece. And I believe he said something along the lines of, I just hope they see the value. I want to retire a Colt. I want to be here forever, but I hope they see the value. And value is definitely different in the eye of the beholder, for sure.
That's James Boyd. I'm Jimmy Cook. Eddie Garrison with us as well. Still to come, top of the hour, we'll have a conversation with George Bremer, another Colts beat writer, covers them for the Herald Bulletin. Also, go NBA, Pacers, draft week. Dustin Dopirak, beat writer for the Indy Star, will give us the latest as the Pacers potentially look around to swap the 7th pick, as well as look at their options across their draft board. Then we'll head out to Philadelphia. Zach Berman covers the Philadelphia Eagles for The Athletic. We'll get more thoughts from afar on what Shane Steichen can do and get an update out in Philadelphia with Nick Sirianni, one of the youngest coaches in the NFL, as he tries to retool and respond and put themselves back in a position to this time hoist a Lombardi trophy. When we return, we'll have a special moment with Eddie, get an important update on the local side of things on The Fan.
You know it's coming. 105.5 The Fan.
Jimmy Cook and James Boyd in the DriveHuber.com studios. Is there a new America's team?
Damn straight.
It's the headline on Yahoo Sports.
Oh, my goodness.
Zach Kreiser, MLB writer for Yahoo, is the headline, James. America's team. How Ellie De La Cruz and the Reds are rocketing onto the MLB radar. That's why it's an Eddie corner.
Dang straight.
Here to close things out in hour number one. Eddie is the biggest, if not tied for one of the biggest, in a three-way tie with JMV, Kevin Bowen, and Eddie. I'm sure each show would argue.
I'd also like
probably
to include
tip the cap to
Matt Taylor in there.
And Matt Taylor. My apologies. Voice
And
the Colts.
Mark Janes.
And Mark Janes. But in this building on a 9 to 5 or on a daily basis, I would say it's you three, no?
I would agree. I'm sure there are some Reds fans in our sales staff that I'm just forgetting off the top of my head, but I would agree, yeah.
8-game winning streak.
Yes, sir. 6-0 last week, Jimmy.
Swept the Astros last night.
How'd your Yankees do?
Okay, this is a pump-up segment for you. We don't need to
sorry,
talk about how the Red Sox just swept the Yankees at Fenway,
okay.
and it was not a great Father's Day in that regard for what was going to be a great day of sports. But hey, forget my Yankees, the Red Legs. Get business. Look, I'll say this. I was like, okay, kind of look at who they played. What's going to happen when they go to Houston?
You're a doubter.
I'm just being a realist. But
You
then
are a doubter.
they crumple up those doubts, they crumple up the realism, and they bring out broomsticks in Houston. So, Eddie, America's team moniker, jokes or realism there aside, where's your pulse now on this team, a half game back in the Central?
I still want to see it for the length of the season. Like, it's a nice stretch run here in the middle, like in the early half of the year. I'd like to see them continue to do this. Like, is it a fluke is my only question. I'm just enjoying the ride and the thrill
I don't blame
of it
you,
all
as you
because,
should.
I mean, they're so young, and they're not supposed to be here where they are. They're a fun team to watch. Ellie De La Cruz, I don't know the official record. The last I saw, they were 9-2. They could be 11-2 with him up in the bigs. But yeah, I mean, they just continue to find ways to win. Yesterday, they're down 5-2. Ellie De La Cruz has an infield single and a ball hit to first base, like just ridiculous. And then Spencer Steer hits game tying 3-run home run, going to extra innings, find a way to win. But it's just fun watching them play really fun and clean baseball finally.
Eddie, you got a series against the Rockies. Does this win streak get to 10?
I think it does. The Rockies are horrific away from.
I mean, they're not good, but I mean, like, man, does it get to 10? And then do we see them really start to roll? And
I hope not. The Rockies are really bad away from Coors Field. Like, that's just how it is. And if they're going to lose, I would say today would be the day, just because they've got a rookie left-hander who struggled as of late on the mound.
Do you have any futures tickets that you're holding for a Central Division title?
I jokingly was texting with one of my friends about that prior to the start of the year. I did not do it, and I'm still not doing it. The odds are horrific compared to what they were, so no.
I joke here because no Reds fan's going to appreciate this, but with the poverty franchise that I root for, the New York Yankees, I just want to thank.
Oh my goodness.
I want to thank the Cincinnati front office for not having this call up last month and allowed me to enjoy 2 games at Great American, because it is. I've joked about it, but it legitimately is a different vibe. Not just the ripple effects here in Indianapolis, but in Cincinnati, if you watch those games compared to how it was a month ago.
And I think it's really cool. That's one of the things about baseball that makes it unique, is that you get those types of scenarios. You don't get call-ups, obviously, in the NBA, NFL like that.
Right.
So you get your opportunity to go to the bigs and you ball out. I mean, that's got to be something where you're, I don't know, if your phone is blowing up, or do your childhood friends tell you, like, hey, man, remember when we were doing this, like, in the backyard? So that's pretty cool.
We might have some more Reds reflection as the show goes on. Of course, potential for some Reds action in the betting department. But we'll step aside and take this time out. When we come back, George Bremer covers the Colts for the Herald Bulletin. We'll get his observations from mandatory minicamp. It'll be an opportunity, of course, for James and him to exchange some notes for us on the air as we enjoy this brief ceasefire, if you will, in Colts news for the time being between now and training camp. But where does everything stand with camp about a couple weeks away? We'll dive into that with George Bremer when we come back on the Fan Midday Show.
Still here in the DriveHulu.com studio. Happy Juneteenth, everyone. I'm enjoying myself alongside Jimmy Cook, Eddie Garrison. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into the show. One of the biggest topics every week until the world ends, I feel like, in Indianapolis, or at least for the next few years, is Anthony Richardson. And so before we dive more into him, I guess I'll ask you, Jimmy, when it comes to what you saw from Gardner Minshew, maybe his support of him, were you surprised at all just to see him be that supportive, that outwardly supportive? I don't know if we've seen that in the NFL.
I was taken aback by it initially because it's so easy in quarterback competitions when there's a dynamic of if you want to call him that, because he's not a long-term veteran, but he has been in the league a number of seasons, and Gardner Minshew, that still feels like he can be a starter in the National Football League. That feels like he's had brief windows of opportunity that have either escaped him or they've found somebody of slightly higher caliber to put in front of him at his numerous spots throughout the NFL. And then you find a good marriage at this point from a guy in Shane Steichen that he had a nice connection with last year in Philadelphia. And you think to yourself, okay, maybe this is his landing spot, at least as a bridge quarterback for a year. But with the understanding, and he's made jokes about this as well, that they had their fourth pick in the draft, right? And they had an opportunity to change course of the franchise and take a franchise QB. He was aware of that from the get-go. And when you have that awareness, it's your choice as a player to decide how the next 6 months are going to go. Are you going to be self-centered, focused on yourself, potentially getting what you want at all costs, but also potentially causing rifts within a team that doesn't need that right now? Or are you going to fight for your job and fight for the starting position the right way while also being a sense of a coworker with the same goals in mind as the rookie quarterback that's going to look up to you in some regard for, hey, you've been in the league a while. What's this whole thing like? And he chose the latter. And so it surprised me initially because it's so easy, particularly in today's NFL, to be like, I forget you. I don't have a responsibility to go and mentor you. I'm going to do my own thing. Versus, we're still going to compete. We're going to battle, but it's not going to be personal, and we're going to help each other and support each other, regardless of who ends up as the week one starter.
I mean, he's a better man than most, because I would be like, man, get this buff dude up out of here. I'm going to show him what's up. And maybe I'm not, delusional, obviously, about why he was brought in here, but I usually just don't see that amount of cheerleading for a guy who is going to play ahead of you if he does really well.
From both of them.
Exactly. And so we got my guy, George Bremer, on the line here. He covers the Colts for the Herald Bulletin. He's also the sports editor there. We bond a lot about preps and how much it matters to still have local coverage of your high schools and things like that. So, George, happy to have you here on Juneteenth. How are you doing?
Doing well. Happy to be here.
All right. George, we were just talking about Gardner Minshew, Anthony Richardson, that dynamic. You've been around the NFL for some years now. Have you ever seen a quarterback competition sort of manifest itself the way these two have, where it comes to just the camaraderie, the bond, and really it seems like genuine love for the other guy to succeed, despite knowing that at some point one of you guys are going to have to take a back seat?
Yeah, and I haven't seen anything even remotely like this. I mean, we've seen quarterbacks that got along, but it was always really defined roles. Like Andrew Luck and Matt Hasselbeck had a really good relationship, but Hasselbeck was towards the end of his career. He was here to be a mentor, and there was no question who was going to start, every week as long as Andrew Luck was healthy. This has been completely, new. When you see the way that Minshew genuinely is the first person to celebrate just about anything Richardson does on the field, and then their interactions in between drills, you're out there, every bit as much as I am. They're constantly high-fiving, shaking hands, doing some sort of little celebration. It's too much to be an act. It happens every minute of practice almost. So, but I think a lot of that comes back to Minshew's personality, honestly. I think he's a guy that is very laid back in the sense of what he wants for himself. I think he's very comfortable in who he is. He's very comfortable in whichever role he has, but he just seems like a guy who legitimately wants the team to do well, and whatever that means. So if that means he's under center and he gets a chance to go out there and lead the team, it's fine with that. If it means Anthony Richardson's going to be the guy, then he's going to support him to the fullest too. And I think he sets the tone, and it makes that quarterback room the way it is.
George, how much of the decision to bring Gardner Minshew in here and the idea that he would be able to carry himself in that way was the result of the relationship that Shane Steichen was able to cultivate with him last year in Philadelphia?
Now, you got to figure that's a big part of it. I mean, obviously, Steichen knows him well, up close and personal with him, knew what kind of personality he was bringing in, knew the way probably he would react to these things. And to some degree, they probably had an idea of how the relationship would work because Minshew and Richardson had been, with the same trainer out there in Jacksonville. I'm sure, in the run up to the draft, they talked to Gardner about him and probably found out then what a big fan he was and knew that this would be a situation that would probably turn out the way it has so far.
George, when you look at the way this wide receiver room, tight end room was sort of depleted throughout OTAs and minicamp, what were you able to glean from that? Was there anything you took away from that, or was it just a matter of, can these guys get healthy so we see what it's supposed to look like in training camp?
I think definitely the latter. I think the upshot of it is, a lot of times that happens during the season. You end up at some point or another having guys on that 53-man or, on the game day roster that you weren't expecting to be there. Mm-hmm. And then at least it's way back this time of year, so I don't think it's going to be hugely useful, but there's going to be at least a little bit of history between whoever the quarterback is and those guys because they did get some, lengthy reps during this OTA period together, but it made it really hard, really the offense as a whole, because even we were talking about it out there, on the practice field a few times. Mm-hmm. Other than the offensive line, there wasn't a big deal, a huge difference between taking first team reps and taking second team reps because they were pretty much throwing to the same receivers, just because there weren't that many. It wasn't like you had Michael Pittman on one side and then, way down on the other end of the spectrum on the other. It was pretty much the same group. And really the offensive line at this time of year, it doesn't really matter much which offensive line you're playing behind because the defense can't touch his quarterback anyway. So it just felt like it was really hard to get any kind of sense of, okay, where's this offense at? It is this time of year anyway because you're in shorts and it's not anywhere near like real football. But the fact that you just had so many guys out, and then Jonathan Taylor too. So, really the entire skill position set, it wasn't anywhere near what we'll even see, I would imagine, at the end of next month when they get to training camp in Westfield.
George Bremer with us, covers the Colts as the beat writer and sports editor for the Herald Bulletin. George, you mentioned how the tides will change once things shift to Westfield for training camp, and as you've looked at the beat over the years compared to this particular season, does it feel like there's more uncertainty because of those missing pieces on offense that add to the drama or intrigue around this quarterback competition than in years past?
Yeah, well, just the quarterback competition in and of itself.
In itself, yeah.
They're just I can't remember the last time there was a legitimate competition to be the number one quarterback. I mean, you had situations like when Carson Wentz went down, and now you're going to have Jacob Eason and Sam Ellinger competing for the potential to play until he got back. But I can't remember the last time they went to training camp and didn't know who was going to start week one, and it was with the idea that player would be the quarterback the entire season, and it wasn't injury related. But then on top of that, when you throw in the fact that they haven't had the first team offense even close to together on the field yet, and the fact that they've got a first year head coach who's installing a new system, I think the level of uncertainty here is as high as it's been. I've been around the team for training camp at least since 2010. And I can't remember more mystery, more intrigue going into a camp than this year. And I think it's going to lead to some really interesting stories. I think it's going to make it fun for James and I and everybody else out there because there's going to be a lot of competition, a lot of different positions, and there should be an awful lot to write about.
George, one interesting story that we're going to see play out in real time is Jonathan Taylor and his extension and when and if he gets it. So what was your reaction to him sort of taking a stand last week to say his piece and argue for his value?
Yeah, I was surprised. First of all, we don't really get a lot of peeks into him, beyond the football field very often. Jonathan's always very polished, always very friendly. It's not like he doesn't want to be with the media, but he's not a guy that usually is going to say very much detailed. It's usually generalities. It's first time we got him this spring, he was talking about the contract and was, my agent, we'll handle this, and I don't even know what I'm getting into, and it's going to be so much fun to see this from the inside and be a part of this whole process. And this time around, for him to come out and basically say, yes, running back position is undervalued in the league, which is obvious. I mean, it's not like he's acknowledging something that is shocking. But then to also say he wants to be here and he just hopes the Colts see the value in him that he believes he has. I think probably the most powerful point he made, at least from an argumentative standpoint, was pointing out that, under this regime, the guys that have sort of been the leaders on the field and off the field, they've all gotten taken care of. And I think that's where he feels like he belongs in that mix. I think it's complicated on both sides. I mean, the Colts, obviously there's risk in giving a long-term deal to a running back. From the Colts side, from Taylor's side, all you got to do is look at Marlon Mack. And then the situation he went through during Taylor's rookie year, on the cusp of, a big free agent deal, coming off a 1,000-yard season, tears out Achilles tendon in the first half of the first game. I think he's played 14 games since. For running backs, there's a lot of risk as well. So I think it's a complicated situation. It does sound like both sides are motivated. But, yeah, between now and training camp, that'll be the most interesting story not related to suspensions that we could possibly see unfold.
George, how difficult is this balancing act for the Colts front office? Because I agree on one hand with Taylor's point that running backs are underpaid, but I don't think it's as drastic as those that play the position feel when you look at the NFL, maybe not quite to the degree the NBA has from the traditional big man, but they've moved away from the market valuing running backs, particularly one like Jonathan Taylor that is not a Christian McCaffrey or an Austin Eckler that has that pass-catching dynamic. They're not willing to send that type of money to that position anymore because that's not the way that it's utilized for championship teams outside of the Titans making that run of the AFC Championship game a couple years ago with Derrick Henry. So when you factor all that in there, how does the front office not get caught up with, I get it, you want to take care of everybody, and Jonathan Taylor's right. They have taken care of everybody in the past, but this is a different animal even with the rookie contract, knowing that if you go too long for too much money, you're putting yourself in a really tough spot 3, 4, 5 years down the line.
Yeah, that's a huge part of what makes this so complicated all the way around. I mean, just look at the Super Bowl last year. Philadelphia was running back by committee. Jalen Hurts was probably the guy that concerned defenses the most in that run game. And then on the other side with the Chiefs, who win the Super Bowl, you have a rookie. I think a seventh round
pick in Pacheco. Yep.
Yeah. So, it's not like either one of those teams was riding a bell cow running back. And this is a copycat league. Everybody's watching what the teams that win do. And that's not new. It's not like that's something that just cropped up last year. And then on top of that, you look at the guys who have gotten deals. Ezekiel Elliott didn't see the end of his contract with the Cowboys. Dalvin Cook just got released. Saquon Barkley hasn't gotten a deal because the situation's very similar there in New York. He's under that franchise tag right now, and he feels like that's kind of disrespectful to him at the moment. He wants that long-term deal, and the Giants, I think, are going through those same things you were just talking about. You give him a long-term deal, you see these 5-year deals being signed, and then 2 or 3 years left on them, teams are moving on. I think that's a huge part of what complicates this whole factor. Offenses are evolving. The running back, the traditional running back, the feature guy is just not as big a part of the NFL today as he was even probably 7 or 8 years ago. And it's not like the distant past when they were still using this a little bit more. Now it's Tennessee, is probably the prime example. After that, it's hard to come up with another team that really leans on that guy other than the Colts in 2021 when Jonathan Taylor had the 1,800-yard season and really the offense all went through him. But I also think it complicates those negotiations because of what you just said. The highest paid running back in the league right now is Christian McCaffrey, and that's because of his utility in the pass game. So where is Taylor's value as a traditional bell cow running back? Probably hard to really pin that, especially with landscape of the rest of the league, where guys like Dalvin Cook are getting released and guys like Saquon Barkley are being asked to play on the franchise tag.
George, you mentioned that this is a copycat league, and I think that's an interesting point that you made because in a few weeks we will see a joint training camp practice between the Colts and the Bears and the Colts and Philadelphia. They have quarterbacks with similar skill sets to Anthony Richardson. How beneficial do you think it'll be for him to see, obviously, someone who I believe is on the rise with Justin Fields, and then on the flip side, the standard in the NFL when it comes to Jalen Hurts and what they do in Philadelphia, considering, again, that they have similar skill sets, and I would guess that the Colts want to see him take a sort of similar trajectory.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at those two guys, and I think they're both, as you said, playing style-wise, physically, they're very similar to what the Colts are hoping Anthony Richardson will become in the NFL. It's going to be tough for him if they set it up the way they have in the past to do much as far as visually with this because he'll be on a different field, than they are. He might have a little bit of a chance to kind of glance down there and especially with Hurts, kind of take a peek at what's going on with a guy who led his team to the Super Bowl. The Eagles are again going to be very near the top of the league and clearly running a very similar, if not the same, offense in Philadelphia that they'll be running here in Indy. But I think maybe the biggest benefit is, if he's able to have some conversations with these guys either between practices or, just in some downtime moments I think in Fields' case, I think it would be interesting if Richardson can pick his brain a little bit about how his rookie year went. Things didn't go well for him in Chicago. He got hurt for part of that time. He was behind Andy Dalton. It took a long time to get on the field. When he did, he struggled. But he was able to come back, play well enough last year that there's a lot of momentum coming into this year. And people feel like he's taken another step there in Chicago this year. So I think that journey is something that Anthony can learn a lot from. And then obviously on Hurts' side, just coming up with Shane Steichen, with expectations being really huge on his shoulders this year and a little bit last year as well, but playing in the system, playing the exact position he's going to play. I just think there's a lot of details that could be gleaned there by Anthony Richardson if they get the chance to have some conversations while this is all going down.
I know you mentioned they'll be on different fields, obviously, but the flip side to that is we're going to see live reps, and I think that that's one of the things that we've all harped on when it comes to the beat is how much can you get Anthony Richardson put into scenarios where he has to get more reps. And so do you think that the joint practices will allow for him to face just more situations he hasn't seen coming into an NFL career, having just played 13 college games as a starter?
Oh, absolutely. And I think the great thing about that from a team standpoint is it's scripted. So you can make sure he's getting the exact situation you want. If there's something in particular, like the red zone, that he's struggling with, then you can make sure that that's the highlight, of an entire period here. You don't have to worry. In preseason games, will you get into the red zone and how many times and how many situations, how many snaps is he actually going to take? You can make that number as long as the other team agrees with you and they're willing to do it. You can make that number whatever you want, and you can blow the whistle early. It's going to be live reps in the sense that he's going to be looking at a new defense. I'm sure they're going to have the pads on those 2 days, so it's going to be much more physical and much closer to real football than what we've seen so far. But also, they're still not going to be taking the quarterback to the ground So you kind of eliminate or at least lessen that risk of injury to him, and you get a ton of looks. The amount of snaps he gets in those 3 practices, the 2 with the Bears and the 1 with the Eagles, are going to be probably more than all the preseason games combined, which for a rookie whose number one thing is experience, I can't think of anything more valuable than that.
George, Jonathan Taylor mentioned this when he met with the media, that there's a history of this franchise taking care of their own, and he's not wrong on that. It's well documented. But when you look at where the dynamics are at play, so trying to have this balancing act of keeping everybody happy, getting everybody fed, while also focusing on the task at hand, which is big decisions at quarterback and trying to build this thing up in the next couple of years. What if it all changes if the Colts stay true to that trend and they pay somebody around training camp or just before the start of the regular season or the start of the preseason, but it's Grover Stewart or it's Michael Pittman Jr.? How does that change the dynamics of things? Because you're right, Jonathan Taylor doesn't seem angry during these conversations, but he's being more talkative about it than he was when he said he was going to let his agent take care of everything.
He's already changed his tone from March or whenever we got him the first time, and so now there's no question. I think the longer this goes, the more that risk comes into play. And I think the other thing that's going to be really interesting in this whole scenario is how important he ends up being in Shane Steichen's scheme of things, but how important they feel he is to Anthony Richardson. And you had the owner on draft day talking about this combo and what they can do. Taylor's still only 24, which I think is one thing that's different here than some of the other situations around the league. Barkley's 26, Dalvin Cook's 27. You might feel that you can get 3 more years from him. I don't know. He's got a lot of wear and tear in Wisconsin as well. Again, this is so incredibly complicated on so many levels. But I think another element of that, to your question, is if he's a guy that you feel like is really helping the development of Anthony Richardson, and he's coming along, and those two, in some ways, a running back could be Richardson's best friend right now as he's trying to figure things out, get comfortable in this league, and you don't re-sign him after this year. Are you stunting the growth of the most important guy in the franchise right now? I think there's so many things here, and if it plays out the way you just mentioned, where you do give Grover Stewart an extension or give Michael Pittman an extension, and now you've got, even if it's not a disgruntled Jonathan Taylor, you just have a disappointed Jonathan Taylor. Does that affect the way that he can help develop the quarterback this year? There's so many levels to that situation, and I think it's something that is going to, it's going to play out throughout the rest of this preseason. It's a huge situation that probably isn't getting as much attention as maybe it should because of all the other things that are going on with the team right now.
George, you had a notebook you put out recently. The lead of it was Dallas Flowers, his opportunity he has in front of him. You've been around him just like I have. He exudes confidence. What do you think of his ability to maybe fill in? I know we talked a lot about Julius Brents, Darius Rush, and what we could expect from those guys when they get healthy and on the field. But it seems like he may have been the forgotten guy who got a little taste of it last year, and obviously based off of what I read in your story and what I just know about him personally, isn't all that excited to just give it up just yet. He seems like he wants more out of this.
Yeah, he's definitely a really confident kid. I think his background is similar to Anthony Richardson in the sense that no one questions the athleticism. He played basketball. He went to college as a basketball player and then switched to football in midstream. He played at, I think, 4 different schools, and 2 of them were football schools. But none of them, I think, were above maybe D2. So there's a lot of question about, can he handle things, competition at this level, and can he come along in football? He's young in football, can he come along and reach that ceiling? And I think he now realizes, hey, he's got an opportunity where even though he's only in year 2 and he only has 1 start, he's one of the most experienced guys in that room outside of Kenny Moore, and he fits what they want to do on defense here. I mean, when you look at the Gus Bradley kind of prototype, he's big, he's athletic, he's long, he's physical, all those things that Gus sees in a corner. Dallas Flowers is there. Now the question is, obviously went undrafted for a reason. Can he get to the point as quickly as he's going to need to be a starter this year? in terms of his comfort level with this defense, with the league in general. But I think we've seen, even in shorts, he has the ability to make some plays. He did it the other day out there. He's done it a little bit on field, but mostly right now as a kick returner. So he's just a really intriguing name. And he's obviously in a situation because of the Isaiah Rodgers situation that nobody thought he would be in. But I think the positive sign right now is definitely not shrinking from that. He doesn't seem overwhelmed by it. He just feels like this is a shot he's been waiting for, pretty much since he started playing football, and plans to take full advantage of it. We'll see how that one plays out. But he's a fun kid. He's a really confident kid, and definitely a guy who probably we aren't talking about, who may end up making some splashes during this preseason.
George, before we get out of here, I have to ask, because you talk so glowingly about your family, your daughter. How was Father's Day?
It was outstanding. Got to spend the whole day with my daughter, which I don't think there's even a better way imaginable than to spend Father's Day. So, yeah, thank you for that. And I hope you had a good Father's Day as well. I know you got around a little bit. I think you were back home in Illinois, so hopefully that went well for you too.
Yeah, man. No real kids, just got the guy kids, who keep me busy. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. And like I said, George, thank you for coming on, man. I'll see you pretty soon. And make sure you keep giving me life advice, because I need it. I feel like every time I talk to you all about kids, bills, adulting, it can never be enough. So I appreciate that.
No problem, man. Still learning myself. I think it's a never-ending process. Anytime, man. Anytime.
All right.
Thanks, George.
That was George Bremer. Again, he covers the Colts for the Herald Bulletin in Anderson. He also does a bunch with preps. And like I said before, I love that he kind of dabbles in both worlds. He's got a good compass about how to do this in this business. And so I'll just say this. Support your local journalism. I think it matters. Whether your kid's still in high school or not, do that. That stuff is really cool. And I got my start with high school sports. So I always have love for that. Now, getting back to, I guess, more Colts-related things, I think he made a very good point about Dallas Flowers and him being a kick returner, him being long and athletic, him being young, and him being also, he didn't say this, but him being cheap. So, I mean,
checks a lot of boxes.
Yeah, if this was going to happen with Isaiah Rodgers, where where it could happen that he is, suspended or not on the field to start 2023, it's not a bad thing to have Dallas Flowers as a sort of backup option, although he would never look at it like that, because that dude is, Jimmy, he is really confident. I remember talking to him. I did a big feature on him before the season started last year about his wild, twisting, turning road to the NFL, and him being from Illinois, for like me, playing at Oak Park River Forest and thinking his future was in basketball. He was saying back then, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I'm meant to be. I can play at this level. And I'm like, okay, it sounds good for the story. Thank you. But, I don't know how much of that I believe. Not that I doubted him. It's just, even with the guys who have the incredible stories, you don't always get your shot. And he got his shot last year, flashed some things. I believe on his first ever, kickoff coverage, he, forced a fumble, and things like that. So he's a guy who's very exciting, very explosive, and could help, again, if Isaiah Rodgers isn't there, alleviate that pressure at the cornerback position and also in the kickoff return position, and there's the punter return position as well.
We hit on this last week that it's an opportunity with Isaiah Rodgers not being there anymore in all likelihood once the NFL lays the gauntlet down with the betting allegations against him, that it's an opportunity to seize the moment for a large number of the rookies that were taken to kind of solidify or have an ongoing tryout and audition over the course of this season into the next for what you're going to do when you had to make those decisions on Kenny Moore and Isaiah Rodgers. But we didn't talk about what it does for players that were already on the roster or players that have been in the league before. In Dallas Flowers, it's just as much an opportunity for him to try to earn a vital role in the secondary as any of the rookies that we've highlighted. And again, it's early. You mentioned the highlight play, the pick that he had in 7-on-7 against Gardner Minshew. And again, those flashes are great. Like anytime you're able to see big plays made.
It was against Sam. I'll say that.
Oh, sorry. It was against. My apologies. Okay, I don't want to. Well, he's in the running as a third quarterback. So
here you go. But no, just for
that's
Twitter
important.
purposes, I don't want anybody bullying you,
and I don't want anybody bullying Gardner Minshew inadvertently either. My apologies there. So against Sam Ehlinger, but still, anytime you're able to see good defensive plays, whether it's 7-on-7, 11-on-11, it's something you take a note of, take with a grain of salt, but you put in the back of your mind. And you realize that, okay, this is an opportunity for maybe him to flex his muscles into a starting spot within this defense that's going to need answers at corner. And it's clear at this point anyway that the veteran route is not what they want to do. They want to see what they have in-house to find the answer towards the cornerback position. And if you're able to get it in a variety of different ways, that's a good problem to have if you're the Colts, if you're not just relying just on rookies, but a player like Dallas Flowers is able to inject his name into the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's awesome for him. And like I said, from a human standpoint, he's really easy to root for. Very humble, but very confident. I remember he told me last year, he's like, how are some of these guys underdogs and they went to Alabama? They went to these big schools. I'm an underdog. I went to schools you can't name. You don't know any of these schools I went to. And I was like, you know what? You're right. So I think that he's, again, someone who exudes confidence and will not let the moment get too big for him. He's feels like he's built for it.
Speaking of moments that could have been too big, we'll revisit one of the more exciting stories from this past weekend in the sports world, have a further discussion on a little field trip that James was able to take in Illinois, and get you squared away as well with some bets as the show goes on. Still to come, Dustin Dopirak covers the Pacers for the Indy Star. Zach Berman covers the Philadelphia Eagles for the Athletic. We'll get a cross-country trip and a localized draft look still to come on the Fan Midday Show.
In the construction. The Fan. Come with me now. Come with me now.
It was an exciting weekend in the sports world. We already mentioned the Reds a little bit. Their 8-game winning streak continuing. I'm sure we'll get into that as the show moves on. A series about to begin for them against the Colorado Rockies. Nice conversation with George Bremer. Podcast will be up a little bit later this afternoon. Just search the Fan Midday Show wherever you get your podcast. Go to 1075thefan.com. We'll be brief in this portion because I understand the pulse of this room is negative to stories like this because just golf's not for everybody. But Wyndham Clark able to win the U.S. Open by one shot for his first career major yesterday. Primetime golf is the name of the game right now because that's what it was. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Finishes at 9 o'clock. I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Gentlemen, first for a baseline, have you ever turned on a major on a Sunday just because there's not a ton on right now, or because, hey, I like the majors? Has that ever happened for either one of you?
Only one I watch is the Masters, and it's only on Sunday.
All right. James?
Yeah, I mean, when Tiger was Tiger.
Here. Agreed?
You just turn him on because you want to see if he can continue to defy logic, it seemed like.
So then the answer to this question already answered itself, which is that the primetime aspect of golf, having a little bit of nighttime action, didn't move the needle one way or the other for either
Could
one.
care less.
Yeah, I'll be honest, didn't move the needle for me. I do have a cop-out, though. I mean, it was Father's Day, kicking it with the family, so I didn't want to be rude and leave them. No, I'm joking. I was not going to watch that either way. But I do have a lot of respect for the sport because obviously, unlike the basketball that I usually watch the most, there isn't, controlled environments. There isn't, the exact same, rim height and things like that. There's a lot that goes into it. So congrats to all the players out there doing that, because I'm like, to get professional at that, man, mini golf for me is awful. So there's that.
Well, Wyndham Clark, it was a very cool story. He had lost his mother at a young age, and she had originally been from Los Angeles prior to their family moving to Colorado, and people were showing him this from the ESPN story by Mark Schrollback of ESPN.com. People would come up and show him throughout the tournament at Las Vegas Country Club pictures of her that he had never seen. He tipped the cap and gave a nice speech to her after he won the trophy, and his journey to be able to go from where he was, which was ranked at one point in time as far down as 293rd. That's where he was ranked a year ago in the official World Golf Ranking.
Dang, I was like 294.
you were knocking on the door, but held off big names in the sport: Rory McIlroy, Scotty Scheffler, Ricky Fowler, who kind of imploded yesterday. Just a +4, +5 round for Ricky. So again, won't get too much in the semantics, but I want to ask you guys one thing that you can get a pulse on because you enjoy fan engagement. They allowed, and they did this at the last couple of U.S. Opens as well, but for the final hole of the tournament, they had the crowd that's ordinarily on the sides allowed to circle the green. And it created this great atmosphere that made it feel like a larger-than-life moment. Some of the more purists are like, oh, this is just distracting, Clark. This is not great. I say, push that to the side. I enjoy whenever you're able to have, oh, man, look at all these people that are around here. This is a big moment. In terms of the get off my lawn angle of, there's too many people around there, this is crazy, versus having masses of humanity around for an iconic moment, even though it's not something that you two necessarily dwell in, cool or not, in terms of allowing that for the final moment of a major. Everybody crowding again, around the green, plenty of space to still do what you need to do, but cool or tacky?
Keep things the same forever. Never, ever, ever change. No, I'm joking. I think it was fine. I think that it was new, and with all things, it's always a lot of pushback when you do it initially, but then you look back maybe in 10 years and you're like, okay, this wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. It's actually pretty cool, and that's the angle I think that this will kind of go in, and it was a really cool moment. I've saw some highlights of it. It wasn't like I was just oblivious to what happened.
It'd be hard. It's on the bottom line. It'd be hard to miss it.
But I do think it was a cool moment, and obviously something where not only is the winner, Wyndham, gonna appreciate it, but the fans who were able to be there are gonna remember that moment as well.
Eddie, any thoughts on having a bunch of bodies around the green? If not, we can move on and get back to James's field trip that he was able to take while visiting his family for Father's Day.
I was just going to say, if you're going to do it for one, do it for all.
Oh, I'm there with you. I'd love to.
Don't have inconsistencies.
Sure.
Like, if you're going to do it for the U.S. Open, do it for the Masters, too, like, while you're at it. If you're only going to do it for the Open, then don't do it.
Good luck with Augusta. A lot of pearl clutching, I think, would happen if you had a bunch of bodies surrounding the 18th.
I kind of want to go to Augusta one day just to wear my own green jacket and see how that goes. No, I would never do that. I think I would get thrown out before I could even step foot in the facility.
Depending on what kind of embroidery or symbols you had on there, you could be in danger of some copyright laws.
I know.
Things are down there.
That'd be tough.
You had an adventure this weekend, not just visiting your family for Father's Day, but also being able to kind of have a two birds, one stone thing. First off, I thought you were done, but apparently the NFL really doesn't stop. Alec Pierce had a camp, correct?
Yes, he had his
first camp out there in
inaugural
Illinois.
youth camp in Glen Ellen, Illinois, where he's from. And I thought he was insane to schedule it right after mini camp. I was like, man, you ain't gonna let me breathe at all. Like, what is this guy doing? But, it was a good time. I had a great time meeting his mother, father, his brothers were there. Everyone was there in the same spot for the first time in quite some time. I believe the last time they were all together was the NCAA tournament. But even then, it wasn't like a relaxation time because Caden was trying to ball out for Princeton.
Yeah.
So it was a really cool moment. I'll have more on The Athletic this week about that. And not just the camp itself, but what it meant for the family and things like that. And I thought it was a lot of fun. And I enjoy those camp days a lot. I did one a few weeks ago. Lonnie Johnson, who's a defensive back for the Saints, he went to Westside High School in Gary, Indiana. And again, it's always cool to see how much these players mean to the kids in their community. Because Alec Pierce isn't a household name around the country. He isn't a Pro Bowler. I'm not saying he can't be or things like that. But to those kids, oh, man, it was amazing. I mean, I posted the video on my Twitter where he was getting swarmed for autographs, and I have this really cool shot on my phone. I'll post all the photos eventually, but there's one I got where you can, because he's wearing sunglasses, and you can see in the reflection of his sunglasses, like 10 kids all in his face, and he's like trying to like figure out, okay, whose do I sign next? And so it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed myself, and again, it was a pretty easy stop considering that Romeoville is 25 minutes away from Glen Ellen, so it wasn't like it was way out of the way or anything like that. And then Nate Atkins from Indy Star popped up on me. I was talking to some young whippersnapper and his father, and then I hear some other guy saying, why are you talking to this guy or something like that? And I turn around, it's Nate. So it was a nice, really cool affair, and I guess Alec wasn't the only Indy face that I saw.
What is more nerve-wracking? Seeing 20-plus notifications in your mentions because something that you've said has been taken out of context, or 20 small children seeing you with a camera and needing pictures taken? I
would say the latter, because you want to appease every kid, right? You want to get a shot of every kid, but you realistically can't, especially because I don't know them personally.
Right.
So in my mind, I can't say, okay, I knew I took a picture of Justin, and I know I took a picture of Jake and Tyler, but I don't know if I got Sean. Like, I just don't know the kids' names and things like that. So there were a few instances where some of them would catch me and they're like, hey, can you get a picture of me and my friend? And I'm like, yeah. Okay, how can I get that photo? And I'm like, all right, how do I do this? You got an Instagram? You got a Twitter? Yeah. I was like, all right, well, throw yourself a follow and I'll get it to you the next day. And so the funny thing about that, Jimmy, is whenever you do have the camera, it's not like I can just get all the photos together all at once. And, the camera has shutter speed, all that stuff. So it's like when I click it, it's just like 10 shots. You got to find the right shot, the one that's clearest and things like that. Kids don't know this. So they expect you to have the shot like ready for them.
You
and
can't
like
airdrop from your camera.
Yeah,
What's
like they want me to
James?
airdrop it to them like right there in that moment. And I'm like, wait a second, you should be at camp, like having fun, doing all the kid stuff. And me being, someone who's trying to have a little bit of work-life balance, I'm like, I'll get it to you tomorrow at some point. Doesn't mean, at 6 a.m. tomorrow. It'll be at some point tomorrow. Man of my word, got it to a group of 3 kids who were posing for me, and it was a lot of fun. And like I said, to me, it's kind of like a stress reliever because it's not a traditional, oh my gosh, what am I going to write after this game? I got to get something on the website. It was just hang out, have fun, kind of get the details, the color of it all, and have fun.
You should have played the long con and either with the kids themselves or with their parents said, hey, I'm going to just drop these out of the sky in one bunch on Twitter. Just hit me with a follow at Romeoville Kid. I mean, and then you got 2 birds, 1 stone.
I've done that in the past, but then, there's the whole, we don't have Twitter.
Sure.
Do you have Facebook? And I'm like, I don't know you. I don't know if I want to add you on Facebook and things like that. And it's funny because I'm like, why do I even care? All of my social media is wide open anyways, even my Facebook. So that does not mean listeners go add me.
That's exactly
if you
what
want to
do it right now.
Feel free. I mean, I'm not, a rude person, but
Eddie, get that link out.
Like I said, it was a lot of fun and I enjoyed myself. And, here's these guys always bullying me. And I'm joking. It was fun. I mean, again, it was really cool to see Alec be in that space. And I believe Yeah, to my knowledge, his older brothers, not older brothers, he has one older brother, one younger brother, but his brothers each had basketball camps in the same area. And so this was like the trifecta to kind of finish it off. So all the Pierce brothers have had their camps back home. And again, it's really cool to have the kids come out to the NFL player in Glen Ellen instead of having to go to Chicago or go to Gary or come to Indy to see someone who's made it to the highest level.
That's James Boyd. I'm Jimmy Cook. Eddie Garrison with us as well. And you talk about that. I mean, the ability to be able to make an impact off the field, there's a lot of different ways you can do it, but I would think that headlining a youth camp and being able to give back to your community is right up there and very, very special.
Free camp.
I mean, all across the board, I'm sure it was a great day for Alec Pierce, for his camp in general, and all the kids that were able to be a part of that, and those that were fortunate enough to be able to get a couple 10-frame shots there from one James Boyd. We still got plenty to cover throughout the Fan Midday show today. Dustin Dopirak of the Indy Star are going to join us, give us the localized version of NBA draft coverage. The Pacers get closer and closer. Thursday's draft night. Then we'll head out to Philadelphia. Zach Berman covers the Eagles for The Athletic. We'll get more on Shane Steichen's arrival here and how things are going with Nick Sirianni and company out in Philly. When we come back, we'll revisit that shocking trade, or at least the frameworks of it, how it might impact the entirety of the NBA. When we return on 93.5, 107.5 The Fan.
The Fan.
With James Boyd, I'm Jimmy Cook. Eddie Garrison behind the ones and twos. Still to come, Dustin Dopirak of the Indianapolis Star. We'll get to him at the top of the hour. Have all our questions answered as we'll continue to hunt for those answers in the lead up to Thursday night's NBA draft, with the Pacers holding the 7th pick, 2 other first-round picks, and plenty of second-rounders as well. We stay in the NBA's lane momentarily here, but at the national level, revisit the conversation we started the show with James, and that is the Phoenix Suns getting ready to acquire Bradley Beal for a combination of picks, a pick swap, Landry Shamet and Chris Paul. There's been a couple other names that have been listed as potential additional pieces in there. Isaiah Todd, who spent a lot of time in the G League the last couple of years, been mentioned as maybe an additional piece from Washington to Phoenix. We'll dive into those semantics as things unfold. There's been talks of a third team potentially as well. But that story, along with the news that Draymond Green will opt out of his player option, with the hope, at least if you're a Warriors fan, that he'll stay in Golden State, but also explore unrestricted free agency, maybe a sign and trade, maybe re-sign, who knows? Which of these causes more of a long-term ripple effect? Is it clearly the Suns, because you know that they are now looking at Matt Ishbia as an owner and realizing, okay, I've made 2 trades now to send shockwaves to the league. We're gunning for the franchise's first Larry O'Brien trophy in franchise history. Or is it the end, real end? You put this so eloquently earlier. Could be the real end of the Warriors era if Draymond's gone and there's not a ultimate answer to replace him.
Yeah, I would lean towards that. I just think that Draymond is synonymous with the Golden State Warriors and their success. Not to the extent of Steph Curry, maybe not to the extent of Klay Thompson, but I don't think they win any of those championships without him. Maybe they do with Kevin Durant there, but they don't become Golden State without Draymond. And I think that he brings so much value, again, as a playmaker and then as a defender. He's one of the smartest defenders I've ever seen. And I get it. He's not likable to a lot of people. There's the antics. There's the stomping on people's chests, which he deserved to be suspended for. And then told Sabonis that, I don't respect this guy. He didn't shake my hand. You stomped on his chest. I would not shake your hand either. That's a tangent. But getting back to the point, yes, I think that Draymond is just so invaluable to that team. And I just don't know if you should give up. Like, how hard is it to win a championship and then rebuild it? I feel like you just kind of, maybe you hang on too long and you look back in 5 or 10 years and you're like, you know what? We should have punted on that. But I think it's an easier pill to swallow if you're trying to squeeze as much as you can out of that lemon, that orange, before you throw it away.
I think the only saving grace here for the Warriors is the idea of a sign and trade possibly occurring if he wants to go elsewhere.
Yeah, he's just using his leverage.
If he leaves outright, I mean, you mentioned how do you continue to add value to a contender? I mean, yeah, they'll always be in the conversation with Steph, but their cap numbers aren't much better than anybody else in the league.
Yeah, that's a good point.
What do you guys think of Shams saying that the Warriors and Suns discussed a deal centered around Chris Paul before he was dealt to the Wizards?
Chris Paul and anybody else? Does it hint who from Golden State would have been on the move, or does it just say Chris Paul?
It just says Chris Paul. There was no hint on who Golden State would be sending. My guess would be Jordan Poole.
I'm going to say it doesn't matter. That doesn't do anything to me for Golden State.
Could do something for Chris Paul.
I
mean, you're instantly probably at your best spot to try to go get a ring.
Oh,
I would put them ahead of Phoenix in terms of prior to this Bradley Beal trade, of course. And even then, I've made, a lot of people have plenty of Bradley Beal jokes. I'll reference I found the Nike advertisement word for word that I was talking about in 2014, where they hyped up a lot of the players that had made breakout performances or were contenders in the playoffs in 2014. We'll get to that a little bit later in the show. But, I mean, I don't know. I don't think it does that much for Golden State as much as it would. We talk about what's Chris Paul's next path to a ring if he still wants one. I mean, of course, he still wants one, but if he wants to try to find a viable path with a role that satisfies him.
Yeah, but it didn't happen, so I don't have to think too hard about it, I
There
guess.
you go.
But, yeah, I just don't see how that would have really worked out.
I'd be fascinated about what the
I guess
pieces were.
Steph would be more of a 2-guard. He's already kind of a 2-guard, but he would really be a 2-guard alongside CP3. But, I mean...
And you wouldn't be able to play as fast either.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's a reason why that trade didn't go through.
Sure.
So there's that.
We're going to take this timeout. When we return, Dustin Dopirak covers the Pacers for the Indy Star. We'll get his takeaways from where the pre-draft workouts have been, where he feels there might be chatter on the trade front, either with the 7th pick or with the second round collection of picks that they have. And then Zach Berman, bottom of next hour, will go out to Philadelphia, get an update with Nick Sirianni and thoughts from afar about Shane Steichen. But Pacers coverage next. Dustin Dopirak. It's draft week. Let's ride.
The Fan.
Final hour of the Fan Midday Show on a Monday. Happy Juneteenth to you. Hope everybody had a wonderful Father's Day over the weekend, and thanks for spending your afternoon with us here on the Fan. With James Boyd, I'm Jimmy Cook, alongside Eddie Garrison as well, behind the ones and twos. We mentioned it. It's draft week. Everybody's hyped up for it. We'll have a number of different angles and pathways that we take between now and Thursday. That journey begins with Dustin Dopirak, covers the Pacers for The Athletic. Dustin, how are you on a Monday?
For Indy Star.
For the Indy Star. We don't have a fine bucket. That's my fault. James, you go ahead and ask the first question. I'm gonna deflect, and I'm gonna. Dustin, how are you? I apologize. Of the Indy Star.
Don't worry, Dustin. I'm gonna put him in timeout.
Appreciate it, James. Ex-athletic, but James is the guy there now, So, but thank you. Thanks for having me on, guys.
I do what I can, Dustin, but I will ask this because I know all the fans are asking you, who are the Pacers going to draft? What trades are they going to make? What's going to look like Thursday night? No, I'm joking. I know you're going to have to answer a lot of these things soon enough, but how do you feel about where the team is and weighing? Oh, I'm sorry. Did he?
I think we dropped out for a second.
Oh, I yelled at him too loud. I'm sorry.
It's okay. We got him now.
He's back? All right, I'm sorry. Dustin, you're back?
I'm back.
All right, sorry about that.
What happened there?
I was screaming about who are they going to pick? Who are they going to trade?
He has a pitchfork.
Tell us everything right now because I know it's what your mentions are looking like these days. I was in those shoes once. I don't envy you at all. But how would you say that the Pacers are, I guess, weighing just their options with that number 7 pick?
Well, it seems like they're just from putting together the tea leaves, but it seems like they're considering all the options, and I think there are a vast number of them in terms of possibilities, direction they could go. From the very beginning, it was kind of remarkable just how early in the process Kevin Pritchard was willing to tell us, like, I don't want to make all these picks. Like, I don't intend to. I mean, even back in January, I remember it was really the first time I talked to him in kind of a multi-reporter type setting was after, Turner's contract extension. And he said, we're going to have 5 picks. I really don't want to make that many because if you got that many young players, he said they can kind of cannibalize themselves, especially when you've already got a young team to start with. And you already saw even this season just how Jalen Smith and Isaiah Jackson cut into each other's minutes once they decided that Smith wasn't going to quite make it as the starting power forward and move him into that backup 5 spot. I mean, you really saw each of those guys lose a lot of opportunities because they were both there playing that spot, and then he threw Daniel Tice in there trying to get some minutes for him when he came back from surgery in February. Only ended up playing 7 games, but I think they just wanted to prove, like, hey, this guy's still a useful player. If someone please take him off our hands, he'll be able to help you. We just got too many of these guys. So I think they didn't want to exacerbate that problem by getting more guys. So they've been really open about saying, hey, we want to move some of these, and we're going to make opportunities to move up. And Pritchard has said that, hey, got a lot of cap space and these draft assets, want to do this to make a splash, and he's been pretty clear about that. And now there's just a question of what can you do exactly? And it seems like the price to move up to 2 or 3 to try to get Scoot Henderson or Brandon Miller is very, very high. And if it's as high as reported, I mean, if the Pelicans are throwing around Zion Williamson from Scoot Henderson for the 2 for Charlotte, the Pacers can't compete with that. There's nobody that they would be willing to move that commands that kind of attention. And it seems like Portland wants a lot. It seems like they're also willing to maybe put Anthony Simons on the block. But you're going to have to really make a big offer that makes Damian Lillard happy to get up to 3. So there's a good chance they could be at 7. It seems like there's also some chatter out there about them trying to make a move for somebody like an OG Anunoby, maybe moving that pick for them. But I mean, I think they do still like the pick. They're interested in what else is out there, but I think they have a couple of several options that could be on the board that could be really helpful. I mean, I think it just comes down to, even still at this point, I wouldn't take All-Star Thompson's name off the table yet, but I would say if Cam Whitmore, All-Star Thompson, Jarris Walker, Taylor Hendricks, those are the 4 guys that it could be depending on who's on the board. And I think those were all interesting players that do fit their needs.
So I'll ask you an easy one. What did it take to get Victor Wembanyama to Indiana? Does it involve stock in the Pacers, stock in the Mad Ants, moving to Noblesville? Do you just take them and move them to San Antonio? Like, what do we have to do?
I think it takes Apple at like $1 a share, James. I feel like you're gonna.
I'm trying to, maybe you could sell them Apple, the whole thing. That's about it. Yeah, like if you could purchase that and give it to them, then maybe you'd have a chance.
I'm not giving up hope. I'm not giving Wemby to Indy. Hashtag it.
James just has a bunch of T-shirts in his apartment. He's trying to sell it out.
Nobody in this town, maybe nobody in this country has more optimism than James Boyd. So
there you go. There you go.
I mean, this ain't happening. I'm just going to say that. They could trade the whole team. They could reincarnate or bring back to their prime level every great player the Pacers have ever had, and they still couldn't get Victor Wembanyama. There's no chance.
Hey, optimism has to be quelled at some point, Dustin. We appreciate you wearing that badge. Justin Dopirak with us, covers the Pacers for the Indianapolis Star. The timeline on these potential trades, Dustin, at least for the second round picks, at least from what's been perceived and reported, was closer to draft day. We're obviously knocking on that door right now, but maybe day before or day of. Is there a similar sense in your mind with the number 7 pick being valued as a trade asset to get a wing starting caliber guy now, that would also be a day before or day of draft type of trade? Or is that something that if the right offer comes across the board, say tomorrow, they'd be willing to spring that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure if somebody would be willing to do it, I guess it comes down to this. If the Pacers like that person enough, would you wait just to see I guess the only reason you would wait is if you think there's a chance, like if you value somebody, if they really like Cam Whitmore maybe, and feel like they don't want to make that deal until they know Cam Whitmore's off the board. I think that's the only name that it could be, I guess. I mean, then maybe you would wait. But I think if Toronto said tomorrow, okay, we're willing to give up Anunoby for the 7. Basically, if they like Anunoby that much, I don't know why they'd wait. Obviously, Wembanyama's going to be off the board. Scoot Henderson's going to be off the board.
Don't you say that.
You're really trying to believe that like San Antonio is just going to forget the draft.
I mean,
No, I figured out one. If the Pacers hold the Spurs hostage, then maybe perhaps.
I mean, look, we have resources, okay? You go out there, you intercept his plane, you do whatever you have to bring him to Indianapolis. You take him to St. Elmo, Harry and Izzy's, and you say, hey, this is how it is in America, how we treat ours here in Indy. We got you covered, big dog.
Hey, you have a great free agency proposal in about 5, 6, 7 years whenever that happens. You could be the head of that committee. To build off of that avenue, though, for trades, Dustin, whether it's OG Anunoby or not, I don't know that it's just you're not saying this, clearly. No one's saying this, but it's not the 7th pick straight up. There's likely more that's involved in that deal. I know you highlighted it over at the Indy Star of most movable to least movable pieces, regardless of if it's OG, but another team where you find that starting caliber wing, who's most likely to be enticing enough to sweeten a pot in a deal that involves moving 7?
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously I think Turner is the most enticing that option it's even remotely movable. I mean, I wouldn't jump if I was them to move him. I wouldn't move him unless I knew I had basically a fallback option at center and a starter quality fallback option at center, or it's a direction somebody else that you could go pick up, and that would have to, I think, involve another deal at the end of the day. So, I mean, I would set a really, really high bar to move Miles Turner because, I mean, I think obviously he's coming off his best year of his career. I think he has a chance to get even better given a summer where he's not dealing with as much as in terms of trade rumors. I mean, all of last year was just a question of when he was getting moved, and it didn't end up happening. I think he's really excited for a year where he doesn't have to deal with that. So I would say, like, you should only move him if you get something really, really, really significant. So obviously the next option down then is Buddy Hield. And I think obviously he's pretty movable because he's got an expiring contract. And I don't know that they want to pay, I mean, he's making right around $20 million a year right now. Do they want to go either add to that or even match that going forward? I don't know. I don't think they're sure about it, especially because they, you know what you're getting from Buddy. You're going to get an elite floor spacer, a guy who is shooting as well as high at that as super high clip for a high volume guy. So he's going to be able to space the floor for anybody, and that makes him valuable for a lot of different places. I mean, from a purely basketball standpoint, he can just step in for a lot of people. And if you've got a little more cap room, you might be able to pay him. So he might be really valuable for somebody else. I mean, obviously, I think that's the one that's enticing and doable for a lot of people. So I think that's the next guy you move after that. I think it's hard to get a lot of return for whoever they might go after. It's just a question of the sort of deals you can involve yourself in, and they're just not the same as if you're not willing to move him.
Dustin, I know a lot of talk is about what pieces the Pacers could add this week, obviously, but what do you think of the way Tyrese Halliburton has shouldered that superstar star player role, especially this offseason? Because from what I've seen on social media, he hasn't really left Indy. He's been, it seems like, at every voluntary workout, which isn't always the case. It seems like he's really taking that by the throat.
Yeah, he really is. I mean, obviously you got to know him a little bit, covered him, and he's meant for this part of it. I mean, he's almost, as good as he is a basketball player, he just really fits this sort of team ambassador role. And he's a bit of a geek when it comes to this stuff. Like he really likes thinking about putting teams together. He's really just such a connector by nature. He likes being able to play with really good players. He knows basically that his style of play is basically designed to make everybody else have a good time playing with him. So he looks out and says, okay, who fits with me? Who fits with us? But I think he really likes that kind of stuff. I think he really likes to get into those kind of debates about, who would fit here, who would be better, who would you trade for, who do you like? And I think he really likes that piece of it. I think he really likes having the responsibility, basically being involved in that way. I mean, he's at all these workouts. He's sitting next to Larry Bird. He's sitting next to Kevin Pritchard. He's sitting next to, coaches, GMs, everything. He loves those conversations, and they really like talking with him too. I think, Pritchard says, I always kind of learned something about that. And he said anything that we do is going to be run through Tyrese Halliburton. I'm not going to make any deal that he doesn't have a say in. He says, I'm going to make the ultimate decision. I don't want it to be a deal where it's like it's entirely his team because that's my job. It's not his. But he's going to take his input and say, okay, if Tyrese really doesn't think this is going to work, I'm not going to try to move it. So it's been fun to watch such a young star grow into that role so quickly and so naturally. It's really one of the most fun part of covering this team right now is seeing him mature into that as a guy who's just 23 years old.
Have the questions shifted yet towards the front office of the balancing act that takes place when you're trying to build this roster the right way and you want to address need, but perhaps there's a best available that is too good to pass up with where they're at 7 if somebody falls? Has that internal dialogue taken place yet, knowing that they do have such a young core at some key positions right now with Tyrese Halliburton, with Benedict Mathurin? Are they at a crossroads at all with, depending on how the board goes, they know the decision they're going to have to make of best available versus key need?
Yeah, I'm sure they have. I think obviously they're not going to share all of that with us, but I think that's kind of like it's a very clear when you look at the 4 guys who could be available. Depending on who's basically you're going to have 2 of them around the way it should shake out, and so basically if there's kind of 2 guys on sort of each side of that ledger, I guess is the best way to put it. I mean, the guys who most clearly fit from a positional standpoint would be Walker and Hendricks because they're defensive oriented forwards who have some offensive skill, but that you're looking at them and saying, well, those guys are going to be good defenders and you could trust that. And so are they ever going to be all-star caliber? Or are they ever going to be the type of players that people look at it in that way? Maybe not. But you can look at them and say, okay, they are already pretty advanced when it comes to understanding rotation, being willing and able as sort of bigger guys, 6'8", 6'9" guys to go guard a point guard if they have to, switch onto them and be comfortable in that position and also be shot blockers and also have a sense of what their offensive role is. So they're the 2 guys that would be the fit answer, where Cam Whitmore and Oscar Thompson would be the high ceiling answer if one of those 2 guys happens to be around. Now, it's possible that Whitmore and Thompson are both off the table, and then you're just in a position deciding which one you want between Walker and Hendricks. But it could be a one or the other type of deal if someone leaves. I would think Detroit will probably take Whitmore, and there's a chance I think that Orlando takes Thompson, and maybe that was the reason why Oscar didn't end up coming to his Pacers workout. So it might end up being a kind of an easy decision between 2 guys who are kind of the fit answer anyway. But if one of those 2 is on the board, that's the interesting question. And Pitcher did say when we talked to him after the lottery that he said, I really think you have to have a guy with a high ceiling at 7 because you got to remember, I mean, they haven't had, they always had Mathurin last year at 6, but prior to that, hadn't had a pick in the top 9 since 1989 in George McLeod. I mean, that's a long time. So you really kind of have to nail this one. I think that's how Pritchard looks at it is you don't want to just get a guy at 7. You want somebody that can be a franchise cornerstone, but also somebody that you can project being a really high-level star. And so I think that's going to definitely factor in to their decisions. And so if they get enamored by the idea of ceiling, and Whitmore or Thompson are on the board, then you can see them make that decision over what I would think from a fit standpoint is a safer pick in either Walker or Hendricks.
Dustin, how should the Pacers feel about Asar Thompson withdrawing from his pre-draft workout, which was previously scheduled? They announced it from their team account, and then I think you and a few others, I was like, wait a second, what's going on? Like, why does he want to come work out in Indy?
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously the first sort of theory that hit Twitter as soon as that happened, obviously they did announce it, they had to pull it back, and then had to kind of explain to us, like, well, yeah, he, withdrew. And so, the first theory was, well, he must have got a promise, that from somebody in the top 6, obviously he'd be a good fit at 6 to Orlando. So I think there is a possibility that somebody in the top 6 said, hey, don't bother going to Indiana. Because, I don't know if maybe he thinks it's certainly also possible. I mean, I don't know if this is good or likely, but, if he thinks he's a better fit to play in someplace like Washington, maybe he was like, okay, I'd rather not get picked at 7. I'd rather stick around for another pick. I mean, I suppose that's possible, but, it would seem a more likely explanation that he's safe to go someplace else. It's safe to go someplace like Orlando in the top 6. So we'll see if that's the case. I mean, if you're the Pacers, you can't be happy about it because it makes you look like you got a little bit of egg on your face. And it's like, okay, why not just come out and work out? So don't have an answer from his camp as to why that happened exactly. So, I guess we'll obviously see on draft day whether it was a bad idea or not. They certainly have a lot of tape to evaluate. These workouts aren't the only way you can decide what kind of player you want. And they can certainly, decide if he's still on the board that they do like him. But yeah, so it definitely doesn't look great for anybody when that happens right after you announce it.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, and I always find it interesting as well when they have the individual workouts. I'm like, how much you learn about a guy when he's in the gym by himself? How much do you compete and things like that? It's funny, we preach these things and coaches preach these things all, year long, and then you get to the draft weekend and everything's so meticulous, which is smart. I mean, it's a lot of money involved with these decisions, but I guess that's my roundabout way of saying I forgive you for maybe not knowing, because I know for a fact that there's gonna be a lot of nuance when it comes to these. One side saying one thing, the other side saying another. But I will say this though: do you think that would deter them just from completely drafting a guy like that? I mean, considering he is extremely talented, maybe comes from an obscure league, maybe not as established as the G League Ignite, for example, but. Would it be that much of a factor, or is it just looking at, okay, if he drops, is it still in play?
I mean, I think it's one of those things where I think it raises the bar to how much you have to like him. I think one of the biggest things that they want to see in these workouts is how you take instruction. I think that's really one of the most important things they try to take, because they can see on film what you can do, what you're physically capable of. But I think one of the biggest things they want to see is, like, if I tell you I want to see you do this different, what's that look like? How quick do you process that? How quick do you process that and adapt? Because so much about this league is adaptability. Is figuring out, okay, what happens when you find out that your go-to move doesn't work, and that you've got to do something else with this guy, or you've got to switch and do something else to fit in the team dynamic. And I know Rick Carlisle loves these things. I mean, like,
he's a teacher at heart. Yeah.
God, is he ever? I mean, and it's just like he's doing this for guys that they'll never pick. I mean, he loves the idea of there are guys that they might not take at all. Like, I think Rick is totally happy if he tells a guy, hey, here's what you should do to fix your shot. They don't pick him, but he gets to be a better shooter. Rick Carlisle will be happy about that. Like, he'll be glad he did it. He won't wish that he didn't, because it might burn him 10 years down the road when that guy sticks a three in his face. Rick's okay with that. Like, Rick likes the idea of teaching guys and having them get better. So he loves this. And so he would have loved to, I think, get a hold of somebody like Alfara and teach him and say, hey, work on this thing. And you see, I think, even more of it every time when it's been individual workouts, when it's been the top guys. He really enjoys that. And so you really see it in him. And I think it's sort of, I'm sure he's personally disappointed to not get a chance to see this guy work up close and then get to see that piece of it. But obviously, they really, really like him. They really, really believe in him, and they think it's the right fit. I mean, I don't think that they would just not take him on principle, but I think it costs them something, because I think they would like to see a little bit more, because you are trying to scale what you see from this guy, because it's like, okay, well, where do they really fit? Where does Overtime Elite fit in terms of, quality of competition? How much better were they from everybody else they were playing against, him and Amen? Like, where do you really put these guys? The athleticism's there, but what does it look like up close? I think they would have liked to have seen that to feel a little bit safer about the pick being there. So it's something. It doesn't necessarily mean it's everything. If they like him enough, if they really think the ceiling is too high to pass up, I'm not going to sit here and tell you there's 0% chance that they take Oscar Thompson if he's on the board. But it certainly changes the dynamic significantly.
Dustin Dopirak with us, covers the Pacers for the Indy Star. Dustin, last thing on my end, I know it doesn't necessarily concern the Pacers' face value, but it could potentially have ripple effects throughout the league as we get closer and closer to draft night, what could be a potential trade fest, at least here in Indy. But your takeaways from the two big news elements of the last 24 hours, which is Bradley Beal likely heading to Phoenix and Draymond Green opting out of his contract via his player option that he had, and what might unfold out west with Golden State.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely shakes some things up. I mean, I said I don't necessarily see the direct Pacers connection yet, but obviously the bidding for Draymond is going to be interesting. Obviously, you can't rule Golden State out of that. You can't look at it and say there's just a good possibility he just gets more money out of them and sticks around. But certainly if you're going to see what kind of what is that going to take? Who might get involved in that? Does that take certain teams out of different players? I mean, I think it's obviously interesting to see Washington kind of getting more into a sell situation. Asking the question, okay, what are they going to are they going to try to? I can't remember if Porzingis is a club or a player option. So see what happens with him. So there's definitely going to be. There's definitely going to be some domino effect there, but obviously interesting on Phoenix's part. They're going to have to make some moves as well to kind of make things work from a salary standpoint. So that could put a couple, players on the market that could be gettable for relatively cheap, just because they've got to clear stuff out to be able to keep all of those stars together. It's going to be a fascinating team to see, Beal and Booker and Durant together, and how long they try to make that work, and how they go about sharing one basketball is going to be intriguing for sure.
Don't forget former Pacer DeAndre Ayton.
Don't forget.
He was a Pacer for like 2 hours.
Long and illustrious.
What a great time that was.
Career. Yeah. So that's the thing. I mean, obviously I think that increases the possibility that Ayton's on the move. And so how does that shake things up? What does that do to various dynamics? You wouldn't think the Pacers would try to be interested in that again and try to mess around with that. I mean, I think at this point Turner's better than Ayton. I don't know if I would have said the same thing a year ago. So I would think it would not be smart for them to try to get themselves in that sweepstakes, because I think they've got a better player. But he's still a far better than serviceable center. And if you're trying to move around roster, then you might if they were to make a big deal that involves Miles, they might be able to backfill with Ayton. So that's several steps down the road. They'd have to do something else first, I think, before they even think about doing that. But, it's something to keep in the back of your mind as an option they might pursue if they want to go really big and involve themselves in a deal that might move Turner.
He's Dustin Dopirak, covers the Pacers for the Indy Star. Be sure to follow him on Twitter at Dustin Dopirak as we get closer and closer to the draft. He'll have us all the coverage we need as we unfold at the countdown to Thursday night. Dustin, thanks so much for making time for us.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, guys.
And you can follow him on Twitter at Dustin Dopirak. We're going to change lanes once again as we roll in the final hour of the Fan Midday Show. Going to head out on the East Coast to Philadelphia. Zach Berman covers the Philadelphia Eagles for The Athletic. We'll get East Coast thoughts on Shane Steichen now that we're a number of months removed from his departure and ultimately signing on to be the next head coach of the Indianapolis Colts, and where things are at with Nick Sirianni, Jalen Hurts, and company as they try to make it back to the Super Bowl and actually win the thing this time around. Zach Berman joins us of The Athletic on the Fan Midday Show.
Jiffy Lube.
Fan.
Still here in the DriveHubo.com studio alongside Eddie Garris and Jimmy Cook. I'm James Boyd. You're listening to 107.5 The Fan, the midday show here on Juneteenth. We have Zach Berman. He covers the Eagles for The Athletic, so technically he's my coworker, even though I don't see him very often. He does a great job over there in Philly. Zach, how you doing, my man?
Hey, I'm doing great, James. Thanks for having me on your show.
Appreciate it. Obviously, we have a lot of connections between the two teams because of Shane Steichen, Gardner Minshew. Our start with the former, Shane Steichen. We've got a chance to know him over the last few months. Pretty straightforward. Was that the same interaction that you had in Philly where it was literally all ball? People say that as a cliche, but Zach, it really feels like it is football and family for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an apt description. The obsession with football, with offensive football, that comes through in any conversation with him. He's the kind of coach who, is always thinking of different ideas, is contacting players and thinking of different ways to do the same thing, basically. So that's probably accurate. As you get to know him, you'll see a little more personality and the chance to talk to him more. There's he's thoughtful about a lot of different concepts in football, but certainly he is all ball. That's a fair description.
Yeah, I'm waiting for him to do a TikTok dance with me or something like that. Don't know if it's going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, I wouldn't bet on that
one. But jokes aside, one of the things he was obviously brought into Indianapolis to do is help develop the rookie quarterback, which we now know is Anthony Richardson. What did you see from him in his role in helping Jalen Hurts take that leap that he took last year? I know a lot gets made or talked about with last year, but maybe we can go back to 2021 and how he just helped Jalen feel comfortable being the starter and maybe not having the skill set just yet to still be successful.
Yeah, and I'll preface this by saying it's not just Shane, right? Nick Sirianni, the
absolutely
your old friend in Indianapolis, played a big part in it. Brian Johnson, the quarterback's coach, now the offensive coordinator, played a big part in it. But Shane being the offensive coordinator and the play caller, in terms of Jalen's development, it was huge. And from Jalen's perspective, the continuity in play caller was very important for him going from his first year as a starter with that group to the second. He hadn't had the same play caller, the same offensive staff really since he was in high school with his dad. So you start there. But as far as Shane, what really jumps out and what's impressive is that he called the offense for the quarterback. And I can't emphasize that enough. Too often in football, you'll see coaches try to get the quarterback to fit into their scheme. And they put together an offense that made sense for Jalen, that accentuated what Jalen did well, accentuated what the players around him did well. And that's what you want. You want a coach who looks at his players and maximizes the players instead of saying to the players, this is my offense, this is how you have to do it. And if you look at Shane's track record, I mean, he had Phillip Rivers, he had Justin Herbert, he had Jalen Hurts, all different styles of quarterbacks, different experiences in their career, and he was able to maximize them in different ways.
Zach, when you look at the team building and roster construction aspect of Philadelphia, one of the things that I've looked at when I look at the Colts is as they build this thing out with Anthony Richardson, at some point you would like to obtain a every down, do-it-all number one wide receiver. Michael Pittman Jr. might feel he is that. He's going to have another opportunity to prove that this season. But for the Eagles, if we turn the clock back to the 2022 draft, that moment to trade for A.J. Brown and find an opportunity to bring in a stud wide receiver can be viewed in some ways as a major turning point for this offense, along with the development of Hurts. I know I'm making you go back in the vault a little bit here, but when did it become clear that that was a move that the Eagles, much like the Bills with Diggs before them, needed to do to put their offense over the top with a young quarterback like Hurts?
Yeah, good question. And I would actually say it was back-to-back years. It was getting Devontae Smith in 2021 and trading for AJ in 2022. And there's a few layers to that. The first being the Eagles were really struggling at that position and spent resources trying to solve it when Carson Wentz was here. They drafted Jalen Reagor in the first round, drafted J.J. Arcega-Whiteside in the second round. They paid Deshaun Jackson. I mean, they had done a handful of things over, a 3-year period, and they couldn't quite get it right. And I think a lot of times what teams do is they compound their mistake. They're afraid, they're so committed to the player that they drafted that they don't want to draft over them. They kind of want to let that talent fail first. And the Eagles, to their credit, were proactive. They saw it wasn't working with Reagor. They saw it wasn't working with Arcega-Whiteside. They weren't afraid to spend a first-round pick on a wide receiver 3 years in a row, which is what they did when they drafted Devontae and they drafted A.J. Brown. But then to also answer your question, I think they saw that, look, they weren't entirely sold on Jalen Hurts 2 years ago. But I think what they did see was that if Jalen's going to maximize his potential, they needed to give him what it took to see who he was, right? They can't look back at Hurts' tenure and say they didn't do enough to give him players. And then A.J. Brown, when he became available and they had the benefit of having a quarterback on a rookie contract so they could pay him, they had draft assets to go trade for him, and it helped that A.J. Brown was good friends with Jalen Hurts. But I think that was the key, that they knew in order to maximize the quarterback, they needed to get the offensive weapons.
Zach, you talked about it a little bit earlier, giving credit where credit is due. Nick Sirianni deserves a lot of credit, I think, for what he did in Indy and obviously what he carried over to Philadelphia. How have you seen him grow in his role and maybe that hunger and desire to sustain it? I think that last year was obviously an amazing season, but that final step, even Shane Steichen talked about a little bit in his introductory press conference, where there's that bad taste of not getting the job done.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, they were on the doorstep there, right? They had to lead in the second half of the Super Bowl. I think Nick has grown in so many ways, but the key with him is his ability to connect with players, his ability to kind of foster an environment in an atmosphere where they enjoy coming to work. They believe in each other. I mean, it sounds kind of like high school stuff when you say it that way, but I think that's a big part of what Nick does well. And I imagine you guys saw that in Indianapolis, where the energy that he has every day, the enthusiasm that he has, his ability to get the team to connect. That's not by accident. That's who he is. So in order for them to take the next step here, it's hard to win in this league. And, the reason why teams don't often get back to the Super Bowl after losing it is not necessarily because of a Super Bowl hangover, but there's so many factors that have to go your way between injuries, the schedule gets harder. There's a lot of variables there, and this is going to be a huge test for Nick.
Zach Berman with this, covers the Philadelphia Eagles for The Athletic. You can follow him on Twitter at ZBerm. Zach, are you at all surprised, because we were initially, but we're not now, but surprised by Gardner Minshew's ability, regardless of where he is or where he ends up, to have such that easygoing, calm, cool, collective manner that would allow him, like he did with Jalen Hurts last year, like he could potentially do with Anthony Richardson here, to have such a cohesive, close-knit quarterback room while also knowing that here in Indy, he does have a shot to be the starter week one?
Yeah, I mean, Garner's a competitive guy. I think that's the first place you got to start. I mean, you go back to the 2021 season, he enters the lineup for Hurts when Hurts is injured. The Eagles win a game against the Jets, and Garner goes to Nick Sirianni's office and asks what he needs to do to be the starting quarterback. and Nick's kind of like, hey, that job's not open right now, right? But that's the way Gardner's wired, and the calmness, the cool personality, if you will, that's definitely present. But he's a competitive guy. I mean, I don't know if you've spoken to him about this yet, but you can ask him about when he was having a shooting contest with Nick Sirianni when Sirianni was with the Colts and he was there on a pre-draft visit. So the thing about Gardner is I think he understands the role that he probably signed up for. I think a lot of people understood that the Colts were looking for a quarterback, but he's, in my opinion, he's like a bridge quarterback in the NFL. He's someone who can win a few games for you if you need him to, but he's not necessarily your face of the franchise guy. And I think it was a good signing, and there's continuity there in terms of the scheme that he can help out with.
Zach, we were going through Gardner's rookie season stats not too long ago. 21 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 6 as a starter in Jacksonville. Could you imagine what this fan base in Indy would do if Anthony Richardson did that with Shane Steichen? Oh, my goodness. I feel like I would be getting like hashtag MVP things in my mentions. But kind of to pivot away from that a little bit to the rest of the offseason. I know we're going to enjoy this break now, and my God, Zach, did I not realize how much the NFL is on all the time? Like, my goodness, I am learning as I get into this more and more. But when we get to those joint practices, what can we expect? Because, you know, Shane was basically saying that's something they do in Philly often, but for Indianapolis, this has been, I believe, their first time in team history where they've had 2 joint practices in one offseason.
Yeah, it's a good question, because if Shane operates the way they did in Philly, and I'm sorry to tell this to your listeners and your fans, that's going to be their preseason game, basically. They're going to use the joint practice to play their starters, to really get the rest that those starters need in a controlled setting, and then they won't play them in the preseason game. Now, that perhaps Shane operates differently, but that's the way Philly's done it the past 2 years, where they said in the joint practices they can use that to really get the work for the ones and the twos. And then the preseason game was for mainly the down the roster players, and the Eagles viewed it as significant in terms of their preseason development and practices. So I hate to say that for the fans, but when you tune in to the Eagles-Colts preseason game, I wouldn't be surprised if there aren't starters on the field.
Zach, I'm partial to the Kelsey brothers. I know that Jalen Hurts had mentioned that his biggest takeaway, at least from the early goings of mandatory minicamp and the early goings of OTAs, was good to have Kelsey back and he's ready to roll.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason Kelsey's he's an Eagles Hall of Famer, potentially a Pro Football Hall of Famer, and each year he kind of takes time to figure out if he's going to come back or not. But I think the way last season ended, he didn't want to go out that way, number one, and I think he still feels healthy enough to play, and most importantly, he wants to play. The way he always frames it, and actually Howard Mudd, who your listeners know well, he's learned from Howard Mudd, he's learned from offensive line coach Jeff Stoutland. They all say that, you know, when you don't want to play, you'll know. And he said he'll always want to play, and he'll say, and Stoutland tells him, no, there will be a day when you wake up and you're like, I don't want to do that anymore. And Kelsey said that day hasn't come. So he's back, and that's critical for the Eagles.
Last one from me, Zach. I find Devontae Smith fascinating, not only because he's a great player, but because of his build. Well, has he ever talked about why he is able to play this game at the highest level and maybe not be built like receivers? Because he works out and does things like that, but he's just a naturally skinny dude, and it seems like whenever he gets hit, he pops up, isn't afraid of anything, catches everything. So have you had discussions with him just about how he goes about taking care of his body and being able to play at that size and play well? Yeah,
that's a good question, because he says he plays big, right? I mean, even though he's not listed at that, it's just it's kind of the way his body's composed, is that he can eat what he wants, he can work out how he wants, and he doesn't really add significant amount of weight. But I think with him, the big thing, people pay attention to the weight, and I get that. But if you look at the length that he has, that's huge for a wide receiver. He's able to have the agility of a small guy, right? Because he is lean, but his length allows him to really extend on some of those high point passes, and it's not something that you would necessarily know by looking at him. But then when you see how long his arms are, how big his hands are, that's really been advantageous for him.
Yeah, he's a special player. I look at him and I'm like, man, that guy's made of vibranium. So it's just cool to see. But Zach, I appreciate you coming on, and enjoy the rest of hopefully your day off today, and we'll see you down the road here soon.
Look forward to it. Thanks for having me on.
Again, that is Zach Berman, my coworker at The Athletic, covers the Philadelphia Eagles. You can follow him on Twitter at ZBerm. He's a really cool guy, been doing it for a long time, and obviously he has a lot to be excited about with that team, to watch them and cover them, because they're going to be in the thick of things again. And then us here in Indy, we'll have a lot to dive into as well on the opposite end of the spectrum, because you look at them and you wonder, like, is that the future?
When can you run a 4th and 1 with Anthony Richardson and it be automatic? When does that time arrive?
I mean, you probably need another Kelsey brother to pop up here soon. But, I mean, he made some good points about Shane Steichen, and if he can, and again, it wasn't all him. Like he said, it was Nick Sirianni, it was the other coaches on the staff. But if, Shane can kind of build sort of the same brain trust around him, or a similar version, to help Anthony Richardson, that has to feel pretty good about his future and what you would expect from him. Now, it's not going to happen tomorrow. Didn't happen tomorrow for Jalen Hurts, but, man, you just wonder if one of those tomorrows becomes the tomorrow, how exciting and how dynamic can that player be if it's Anthony Richardson, given his otherworldly physical gifts, because Jalen Hurts was a better college player, better player now, obviously, might even be a better leader right now. But physical gifts, I think Richardson's in a class of his own.
And I especially enjoyed his perspective on he put it just to a T of what franchises struggle with at times, which is the ability to look at your roster and realize that somebody you drafted might not be the true answer, and not to just let the contract die, but adjust in the moment of that contract, move on, and make a total U-turn on what you're trying to do at a particular position. The Colts, I'm not saying that's necessarily something they have to do at wide receiver as drastic as the Eagles did over that 2-year period when they brought in Smith and Brown in back-to-back seasons via trade. But when you look at where the Colts wide receiver room is today on June 19th, I don't know if the future top target for Anthony Richardson is there right now. Will they be too scared to be able to make that change or make that big move when the time comes? That's another element that we're going to have to wait and let it play out. James Boyd is with me. I'm Jimmy Cook, Eddie Garrison here as well. Try to win you some money to close out our Juneteenth edition of the Fan Midday Show.
The Fan.
Final time here on the Fan Midday Show. Jimmy Cook, James Boyd, Eddie Garrison guiding us through the afternoon. Plenty of MLB on the slate today. Not as much as a usual Monday would bring, but still plenty of games, plenty of action, and an angle on the Reds or two, perhaps. Try to win some money.
The Jay Cook Plays of the Day.
This is me, all right? I'm not an athlete. This is my way. This is how I win.
Today's Plays of the Day.
Don't do it.
We're going to take the Toronto Blue Jays to win on the money line over the Miami Marlins. That in Miami. And we're going to take...
If you do it, I'm not showing up Wednesday.
I'm calling a bluff here. And we're going to take the Cincinnati Reds to win on the money line.
He did it.
Over the Colorado Rockies.
You think you jinxed him, Eddie?
Yep.
Would it have been first five? Would that have made you happier?
Nope.
Okay. Just no action on there?
Yep.
I had them to win on a winning bet during this streak. I'm okay.
It was Kansas City. Come on.
Hey, a win is a win is a win is a
My
win.
17-year-old travel team can go out there and beat Kansas City.
I don't know the lineup of your 17-year-old travel team. We go lefty, righty, lefty. What are we doing here?
We got a couple lefties in. That's all. It doesn't matter.
You ride with anything tonight?
Oh, is that all you got?
That's all I have.
Rays and Reds.
Rays and Reds. Jays and Reds. Jays and Reds. Jays and Reds.
Jays. You're going with Barrios again, huh?
Damn.
Eddie's got the Rockies.
I'm going to go over 8. Boston Red Sox, Minnesota Twins. I really like the matchup. Minnesota hits lefties well at home, and Pablo Lopez has not played well or pitched well as late for Minnesota. I kind of like Minnesota in the game, but I think over 8 is a solid number. And then Corbin Burns in Milwaukee, they take on Arizona. I don't like the line here because Burns has not been good. Merrill Kelly has been good for Arizona. It's a pick 'em pretty much, 102, 116 on minus. I'm not going to touch that one at all either. So the only play for me today is Boston, Minnesota, over 8.
I'll throw one more in there. Over 1.5 total bases for Ellie De La Cruz tonight as well for the Cincinnati Reds.
There we go. You're probably going to need 2 hits, but there you go.
Well, I wanted to take 1 hit, but minus 225 doesn't feel like real juice to throw to the listeners, and I'm not trying to pad stats here. So,
No.
You know. James, this is your final opportunity to not only get in on the wagers for the week, but also state your case for what you really want to see happen for the Pacers in the NBA draft. We're not going to talk to you until next week. I understand it's not your beat anymore, but potential trades with the 7th pick. Do you want to see a starting wing if it meant giving up 7? Do you want to see the second rounders move, or is there a prospect right on your heart that you would like to see here in Indiana?
Well, Victor Wembanyama's on everybody's heart, but
it is.
in the realm of reality,
there it is.
I would like to see them move number 7 for a starter level wing, someone who is a bona fide 3-and-D type of guy, and perhaps a little bit more when it comes to Tyrese Halliburton, because I think that if you add someone who has some offensive game, doesn't have to be the greatest, Tyrese can bring more out of you because he makes the game so easy.
If Buddy Hield was moved in said deal, would it be a problem for you?
Yes, it would definitely be a problem. No, you keep Buddy Hield. I think that
really.
I think Buddy Hield is extremely underrated.
No, don't get me wrong. I think he's a very talented player.
And unless you are getting somebody who's really really good,
Ayo Dosunmu.
No,
you got mad at me for the Indiana take earlier with OG. I just thought
it's like I like Ayo, but no, Ayo's not good enough. But I do think that Buddy is really underrated. I mean, he's one of the most prolific 3-point shooters ever in NBA history. So you don't move on from that guy just because somebody might be a little more shiny like that. You're gonna, see why, that guy is as good as he is. So no, keep Buddy and add a 3-and-D guy if you can.
It's James Boyd. You can follow him on Twitter at Romeoville Kid. Last thing on our spectrum today, outside of bets, outside of Eddie's love for the Reds right now and the 8-game win streak that they are on, as you look at where the depth chart is right now, post mandatory availability for the players going into training camp, any last needle moves or any feelings for you set in stone for any of these debates that we're going to have over the next couple of weeks in terms of who has the most momentum, whether it's quarterback, whether it's cornerback, whether it's wide receiver?
I don't know. I don't think there's any momentum per se, but I would say that Dallas Flowers has to feel really good about what he did throughout OTAs, minicamp, and sort of having a leg up on the rookies. Now, I know a lot more is invested in them financially and where they were picked and things like that. But, I mean, for an undrafted guy, who has more experience than those guys, he's in the driver's seat, I feel like, for being a starter alongside Kenny Moore.
Any other crazy trades this week? Or is the icing on the cake, even if the Pacers move out of 7, what the Suns did?
Is Zion still a Pelican after Thursday? I mean, there's been rumblings of that and their, displeasement with his inability to be on the floor. So we'll see how that goes. And that's one that I'm keeping an eye on for sure because he's such a great talent, but he just isn't out there enough to make you feel great about his future.
Evan Sider had mentioned this from Shams Charania. The Hornets, from what I've been told, prefer Brandon Ingram over Zion Williamson in a potential trade for the number 2 pick. Jason Concepcion, one of my favorites on Twitter, showed the MJ push-off against the Jazz in the finals. MJ getting open for one last bad front office move. Special thanks to George Bremer, Dustin Dopirak, and Zach Berman. Podcast will be up 1075thefan.com. The Ride with J and V is next. Stay right here.